Good evening, friend. As you settle in for the night, take a slow breath and let your shoulders soften. Whenever you're ready to drift off, I'll be close by with quiet stories from long ago, small, careful labors that kept ordinary life moving. Tonight, let's quietly explore places where warmth, water, and steady hands did their work without fuss. We will begin among river cities where clerks pressed gentle marks into damp clay, counting green and oil with a reed stylus and tidy shelves. Then, before the sun climbs, we'll step into warm, tiled rooms where attendants prepare an Ottoman bathhouse, folding towels, rinsing marble, and listening to the hush of steam. After that, we'll sit beside a window in Venice, where tiny glass beads rattle softly in shallow trays while a patient stringer measures lengths by hand. And finally, we'll walk along low mounds across a dry plain, following keepers who tend underground channels and guide cool water from mountain to garden. There is nothing to do here but listen. No hurry, no loud moments. Just simple routines, and the comfort of knowing that countless careful tasks once filled the hours. If sleep comes, let it arrive. The stories will keep a calm pace, like a small flame that does not waver. When you're ready, close your eyes, slow your breathing, and we'll begin. Morning begins as a pale line over flat roofs. The courtyard still holds the night's cool. A jar of water waits near the doorway, sealed with a clay stopper pressed with a familiar pattern. A clerk arrives before most voices, sandals whispering over reeds laid as a mat. He lifts the jar, cracks the seal with a twist, and dampens a small bowl of fine clay. The day will be measured in soft rectangles and gentle wedge marks. On a low table sits a stack of wooden boards, smoothed by years of palms. A cloth lies across them, heavy with moisture. Inside the cloth are small lumps of prepared clay, each the size of a closed fist. The clerk draws one out, sets it on the board, and with wet fingers shapes a tablet oval at the edges, thicker at the middle. He turns it once, twice, bringing the faces even, then sets it aside to rest. Clay needs a moment to remember, it is willing. The reed stylus is simple and exact. One end is cut to a neat triangle, the other is rounded. The triangular tip will make wedge impressions, the rounded end will smooth edges and fix small errors. Before writing begins, he touches the stylus to water and tests a mark on scrap clay, a single wedge shallow, then a second beside it, deeper. The soft clicks sound like tiny footsteps. A porter arrives with a basket of barley cords wrapped around its neck, a clay tag dangling from the knot. The tag bears a little seal and a few marks. The clerk nods, records the time with a glance at light on the wall, and reaches for the first tablet. With the stylus he presses a sign for barley, then a count. Each wedge lands without hurry, angled, then turning, then straight. He adds a sign for the source, a courtyard name, simple and known, and the intended storehouse. A final space remains at the bottom, left blank for the seal. There is a rhythm already. Baskets sigh against the mat. Dust lifts and settles. Each delivery gets a tablet if it stands alone, or a line on a larger tablet if it belongs with others from the same group. When a lot arrives tied with the same cord, the cord is looped through fresh clay and pressed flat. A cylinder seal rolls over that clay, leaving tiny figures and lines that bend around and meet at their ends. The pattern is both picture and name. It reads as we agree. A side note, placed gently. In this world, a seal impression often served where a signature might today. A pattern in clay told who had touched the goods and who would answer for them. Shelves line the cool, sheeted wall. They do not shout, they only stand ready. Dry tablets from yesterday rest on the upper boards, still dark but firming. Fresh work will sit lower, where air moves. The clerk writes standing, then sits for a while, then stands again. The stylus never leaves his reach. He turns each tablet in his hands as a baker would turn bread, checking edge and face. If a piece shows a smaller crack, he rubs it with a drop of water and the rounded end of the stylus until the line softens. From time to time a supervisor pauses, counting aloud in a low voice that stops at the same point each morning. He carries a small bag with tiny tokens, cones, discs, and spheres. These are kept for certain transactions, lodged later inside a clay envelope that can be broken to prove the count inside. Today the work is simpler. No envelopes, only open tablets, and the easy honesty of the courtyard. Another porter arrives, this time with jars of sesame oil capped with mud and tied with twine. Oil shines through hairline gaps in the caps, forming small halos. The clerk notes a different sign, the one for oil, and marks the number of jars. He leans, presses the stylus with patient weight to keep the wedge edges clean on damp clay. The tablet's face fills in an orderly way, commodity count, source, destination, and space for the seal. The porter sets each jar along the wall in a neat row, leaves a simple nod, and returns to the lane without words. The sun climbs a little and reaches the far side of the courtyard. Shade withdraws in a careful line. A boy brings a tray with flatbread dates and a small cup of watered beer. The clerk eats with clay on his hands, careful not to leave crumbs on the tablets. He wipes his fingers on a damp cloth, sets the cup aside, and looks across the shelves. Today will be moderate. Not a festival day, not an end-of-month tally. Only the ordinary rhythm of storage and release. He begins a larger tablet for outgoing goods. Its surface is broader and will carry many lines. He rolls the clay lightly with the stylus's long side, making faint bands that guide the rows. In each band, a mark for the item, a count, and a short sign for the household that receives it. The words are not poems, only promises kept in careful order. At the end of a filled band, he lifts the tablet, breathes lightly across it, and lays it back on the board so the damp can even itself. A quiet aside sits well here. These wedge marks were not the work of isolated scribes only. Many clerks learned enough to serve storehouses, temples, and merchants. Their days mixed writing with looking, counting with listening. The records they made were practical: first barley, oil, wool, fish. Read bundles, yet they also built a habit of time, who brought what, when, and for whom. Mid-morning brings one small problem that does not trouble anyone. A tablet bearing yesterday's seal was set to near the brazier and dried to fast. A corner has curled. The clerk wets a cloth, wraps the corner, and leaves it in shade. Later, when the clay has softened a little, he will press the corner flat against a board and let it recover in its own pace. Clay, like people, remembers the last hand that touched it kindly. A breeze finally reaches the courtyard through the gate. It skims the top shelves and circles the lower ones. The clerk rises, rolls a cylinder seal across the face of the morning's first tablet, and watches the figures appear: a lion, a star, a line of script that matches the name on the gate. He presses the seal again across a small clay tag and loops it on the cord of a basket. The pattern repeats. The document and the goods mirror one another. Both will make sense tonight, and tomorrow, and next week if a memory needs help. By the time the sun rests on the wall's top edge, a row of tablets doze on a low shelf. Their surfaces glow damply. The stylus stands upright in its jar. The wooden boards are flecked with tiny marks where clay rested and lifted. The clerk closes his hand over the last tablet of the hour and smooths its edge with the rounded end. He places it in the line and looks once around the room. Nothing stares back. Everything waits. Heat gathers like a blanket, and the courtyard answers by shrinking into its shade. A woven awning is drawn another arm's length outward. Its edge trembles a little in the moving air. From the lane beyond the gate comes a soft, steady procession of heels and dust. Jaw rims touching in brief clicks. Cord fibers singing as baskets shift on shoulders. Afternoon belongs to arrivals. The gate boy chalks a line on the jam where the sun stands at mid-sky. He loops a thumb under the strap of a water skin, offers it along, and returns to his stool. Just inside, the clerk has reopened the jar of damp clay. He turns a lump against the board, smoothing in small circles, and brings it to the same oval thickness as the morning's tablets. The stylus is rinsed, the rounded end wiped on a strip of reed mat, and the next space on the table clears of crumbs. Baskets come to buy two, next tied with a common cord, each bearing a little tag the size of a fig. The porter sets them down and waits with his hands on the rim. The clerk notes the source with neat wedges, adds the barley sign, and then the count. The afternoon pace is the same work at a closer, spacing deliveries, bunching, questions arriving in pairs. He keeps his voice even and uses his hands to answer where a nod suffices. Here, there, wait, yes. A cylinder seal begins the day on the clerk's mat and ends up traveling like a polite guest. For small lots, the clerk presses his own seal across the tablet's lower band. For larger ones, the porter's overseer unrolls a seal from a leather thong, passes it palm to palm, and the clerk makes room for that pattern too. The guard at the gate, called for special entries, arrives with a seal of his own, a different design, a different authority. The clay shows a short procession of little pictures, a star above a horned beast, a man with hands raised, a line of wedges that belongs to a household name. Each imprint intersects lightly with the last without crushing it. A quiet aside, in this place patterns did more than decorate. They braided responsibilities. One mark said I delivered, another I received, another I witnessed, and together they asked the tablet to remember for everyone. Space up the low table now holds 3 small trays, tablets damp and waiting on the left, fresh impressions cooling at the right, scraps of reworked clay in a bowl between. The clerk keeps his sleeves close. Clay forgives moisture better than cloth forgives clay. When a surface grows to shiny, he rests the tablet on a board dusted with fine sand so the next line of wedges will stand clean without sliding. A woman with a ledger cord on her wrist steps in, a clerk from the storeroom across the lane. She brings a bundle of yesterday's tablets wrapped in a cloth. 2 will need to be copied onto larger pieces before the originals are dried hard because the entries continued onto the tablet's edge. The day tolerates such small corrections. A damp cloth brings softness back to the surface. The new tablets receive the lines in a calmer layout. The old pieces will still be fired later to close the record. The new ones will join them as clear, legible twins. Counters shift from barley to wool. Loose fleeces arrive with tags pressed flat against their cords and a bit of scented leaf under the knot. The clerk changes the commodity sign and feels the small pleasure of alternate wedges, the body of the sign made with a different tilt, the count written in the base 60 rhythm he learned by heart. 1, 2, 3 groups of 10s, then the appropriate marker for 60s and beyond. He does not add aloud. He places signs where they belong, and the number shows itself. On a shelf nearby, thin sherds stand upright like little sails. Each carries 2 wedge strokes and a scratch. These are temporary markers, slipped between tablets to hold the day's odor while clay still thinks in damp terms. When the tablet's firm, the sherds will be replaced by small clay ears, tabs with a single sign pressed on their faces, tucked at the edges to mean barley, 2nd quart, 3rd day. Shells begin to read like a quiet sentence. Top to bottom is weak, left to right is morning to dusk, front to back is incoming, then outgoing. The storehouse rests easier when the wood knows where to guide the eye. A youth with ink-dark hair appears at the door, an apprentice from the scribal room. He carries a narrow board with dry tablets from last season that were chosen for baking. "Kiln tomorrow," he says, and the clerk nods. Baking is not always used. Air drying saves many records well enough, but lists that will anchor accounts for months earn fire, short, clean heat that turns clay from willing to permanent. The apprentice sets the board on a bench, and together they choose a dozen for the kiln. Clear hands, vital tallies, neat seals. The rest stay on their shelf, hardening into a long, readable quiet. The courtyard center receives a shallow tray of water, so dust can learn manners as people cross. A jar of sesame oil darkens a patch of clay where a cap leaked. The clerk places that tablet on a higher shelf for safety and writes a note to inspect the seal tomorrow. Tools that serve repeated checks rest in a row: a small string for straight lines, a chisel of bone to correct an errant wedge, a tiny sponge that kisses away shine after a correction. A foreman from the grain hall arrives with a count that must agree with the one on the shelf. They set the morning's tablet beside his line by line. The numbers neat like two hands and match. Where they differ by a mark, the reason shows. One line refers to sacks tied together but counted as single, the other remembers to divide and sum. They settle it with a fresh entry, two wedges that say together, a mark that says as one, and a seal rolled across the margin that touches both tablets at once. Agreement recorded, air passes through the room with a small, contented draft. Every hour, the clerk stands, stretches his hand, and carries the newest tablets to the lower shelf where airflow is kind. He lays them with a thumb's breadth between each, edges trued so no one tablet leans its damp against another's face. At the end of every row he places a small clay spacer, a flat pebble of baked clay that keeps the last tablet from sliding if the shelf is bumped. Geometry grows out of habit. Straight lines calm the eye and give the hand fewer chances to wander. When outgoing goods are prepared, the clerk reverses his morning order. He fetches the large tablet where recipients' names gather in neat rows, moistens its edge, and adds the afternoon's allotments: oil to the lampmaker's lane, barley to a boat crew, wool to the carters near the river bend. He leaves a thin band under each line blank for recipient seals, which will arrive with their empty baskets and long cords. The bands wait like open hands. Late light returns to the courtyard in a warm slant. The awning's edge glows a quiet amber. A breeze lifts the fringe and sets it down. The afternoon queue thins. A porter ties a final knot, presses his household seal into a tag, and smiles when the pattern rises clear. The clerk mirrors it on the tablet, then listens for the little click when clay meets shelf. The sound is small, ordinary, and perfect for finishing. He wipes the stylus on damp reed, caps the jar of clay with a fresh wafer pressed by thumb and nail, and notes a last pair of signs on a scrap: tomorrow's first task, to be tucked under the stylus so it will not be forgotten. Shelves stand quiet, seals rest on their cords. The courtyard holds the evening's first cool like a bowl. The storeroom's quiet opens into an even quieter room, nearby walls washed with lime, a narrow window high above, and a pair of long tables set end to end. This is where copies are made, and lines are checked when to tallies must agree. The floor carries a simple comfort of reed mats. The air holds the cool of shaded clay. A shelf along the far wall keeps a neat troop of cylinder seals wrapped in strips of linen, each bundle knotted with a loop that feels different to the hand so the right one can be found without looking. G to long. The clerk brings a board with 3 tablets that need fair copies. One bears the morning's outgoing list, clear but crowded. Another holds a set of entries that will anchor a month's accounts. The third is a short, tidy record of jar lids resealed after inspection. He sets them on the table and wets his fingers in a little dish. A scribe already at work nods once, shifts a lamp closer, and turns the first tablet so the sun stripe along the wall will not dazzle its damp. Copying here is not performance. It is a slow, companionable matching. The old tablet sits to the left, the new one in front. The scribe smooths fresh clay into a long rectangle and rules faint bands with the stylus's side. He reads a line with his eyes, breathes once, and places the wedges in the new clay in the same sequence. Commodity sign count, household mark, seal band left blank. The wedges are cousins, not twins. They carry the same meaning without trying to mimic the pressure of another hand. When a line is long, he touches the rounded end of the stylus to the clay to make a soft dot that says continue, then lifts his hand, and the next band receives the rest without hurry. On the far table, an audit set rests under cloth tokens of baked clay kept for the kind of trade that prefers little shapes to long words. There are smooth cones, flat discs, and lentil-like ovals, each size tied to a unit of measure. For certain exchanges a flock counted while the shepherd is away. A store of copper scales stored in another house tokens can be counted, slid into a soft clay envelope, and sealed with multiple seals. The envelope, when dry, looks like a small egg or a sleeping hand. If anyone doubts the tally, the envelope can be broken to show the tokens inside. The clerk's hand lingers over a set of 10 small discs, and to larger ones. He does not need them today. He only checks that they are all there, then covers them again and sets a small sherd with 2 wedges on top to say seen. A gentle note offered like a sleeve smoothed before long lists traveled easily on tablets. Tokens and envelopes held numbers well, even after wedges became fast to make. Certain people trusted the heft of a count you could roll in your palm. The 2 ways marks. Shapes shared the room without argument. Back at the copying table, a second scribe points with his stylus to a place where the old tablet trails a line into the edge. The copy is given a more generous margin. The phrase that nearly fell off the first surface now sits safely inside the new. The old tablet will still dry and live on the shelf. The new one will be baked tomorrow when the kiln is lit for the month's tallies. The decision rides on weather and need. Fire makes clay certain, but fire is not stingy here. It is used when certainty will be asked later. A tray of seals travels hand to hand with the quiet importance of a visiting bowl. One belongs to a merchant who will add his mark later this week, another to the gate guard who witnessed a transfer. Each is pressed lightly on a test slip of damp clay to confirm its edge is clean, its pattern sound. Smudged impressions are not scalded. The seal just meets a bit of oil on a cloth and tries again. The test slips dry on a reed and will be kept only a day, then kneaded back into usefulness. Outside, the sky shifts from flat to thoughtful. A smell like damp reed arrives before any drop. The gate boy glances up, the awning's edge darkens, a small ring appears in the dust where the first raindrop tests the ground. Rain in this season is friendly, but even friendly rain changes the room's decisions. The clerk gathers the newest tablets from the shelf and moves them further inside, spacing them on a low rack where air can pass under and over. A dish of fine sand is shaken lightly across a face that grew too shiny, so the wedge tips will stand against the evening's moisture. Roof tiles begin their small music water walking from one to the next. The scribe room smells cool and clean. A kiln day planned for tomorrow will now wait to mornings. Baked clay prefers a steady draw, and damp air asks fire to hurry when it should not. So the fair copies, smooth and confident, will rest between boards overnight, and the older tablets will receive a thin wash of slip along their backs, a brush of watered clay that dries like a skin and keeps edges from curling if a guest finds them. In the courtyard, jars are set on low risers so the floor around them can breathe. Basket rims are turned outward to dry evenly. A porter returns with an armful of reeds and lays them loosely over the lower shelf like a tent so drops that wander through the awning fringe will shed away. The clerk places a baked spacer under the corner of the heaviest tablet to lift it clear of any unseen wet. Every gesture is small. Together they keep the rooms calm. The afternoon's audit arrives without drama. The foreman from the grain hall returns with his own copy of the outgoing list. Side by side, the two tablets walk down their lines, and where one shows together, the other shows divided, as before. The solution they wrote earlier still pleases both. They roll the same seal gently across both margins again, not to overwrite, just to let today's damp clay remember that two minds agreed twice. Rain becomes steady conversation. The gate closes halfway to keep puddles from learning to come in. Lamps are trimmed earlier than usual. Their wicks lie low and even. A small jar of oil on the clerk's table receives a new clay cap, pressed and smooth with the rounded end of the stylus, then marked with a wedge and the household sign. Even lids are records here. Near the end of the day, the scribe lifts the month's anchor tablet, the one that will be baked when weather turns. He smooths its edge, breathes across the surface to read if any wedge tips raised to high, then runs the flat of the stylus along the margin to settle them. He presses a thin line of blank space at the bottom, a courtesy to the person who will read it next season. The tablet is carried to a shelf that feels more like a bench, firm, high away from drafts. A baked shirt impressed with a single sign is tucked under the front edge so a glance will say ready for fire even in dim light. Evening redraws the room in grays. The copying board is wiped, the stylus tips are rinsed and left pointing up to dry. The token set is counted once more by touch under the cloth. The clerk closes the jar of damp clay with a lid and marks it with two shallow wedges to say the blend within is for tablets, not seals. Doors are left on their latches, but not locked. Night air slides under and out again, pulling a fresh cool through. When the rain slackens, the roof drips count themselves to sleep. Inside, shelves hold their geometry without effort. Rows that read morning to dusk, layers that speak incoming and outgoing, corners that wait for kiln day when the sky clears. The last lamp is pinched between finger and thumb, and a small curl of smoke lifts and forgets. Rain finishes in the night and leaves the courtyard washed the color of bread dough. Roof edges tick for a while, then forget. By first light the awning dries in pale patches. A kiln day can keep its promise. The kiln lives at the far end of the compound, a round belly of clay and brick with a low mouth and a vent that remembers how to draw. It is not large. It does not need to be. Pots go here, and sometimes tablets that will anchor accounts for seasons instead of days. The keeper arrives early and tempers the floor with a thin scatter of sand so nothing will decide to stick when heat begins to teach firmness. On a mat nearby the clerk lays the chosen tablets in order, the month's anchor list, two fair copies made yesterday, and a small set of bridges, slim pieces, that summarize a week and refer to the fuller shelves. Inside, each face is checked with the flat of the stylus so wedge tips lie level, each edge is smoothed with a fingertip dipped in water, and then dried with a corner of cloth so it will not gloss. A tiny shirt impressed with the seal that marks the storehouse sits on top of the stack like a polite title. Fuel is simple. Split reed light brush cakes of dung that learn patience in the sun. Fire is treated like a guest who knows the house well, welcomed and guided gently, not asked to shout. The keeper builds a low flame, then higher, then holds it steady. Heat climbs the inside curve, the vent whispers, the day brightens. The clerk and the kiln keeper place tablets on thin baked tiles, faces upward, with a thumb space between. A board shields the mouth while the first heat takes. There is no drama. Clay that was willing yesterday becomes certain today. While the kiln finds its hum, the gate begins its own music. A merchant long expected arrives with his overseer and a neat habit of reconciling by cords. Their train is modest, two porters, one with a coil of fresh fiber, one with a basket of small clay tags wrapped in linen. They set their things on the reed mat by the low table, and greet the room with a measured tilt of the head that means we have time. The clerk brings out the outgoing tablet that carries lines meant for the merchant's house. He wipes a little sand across the margin, then breathes on the surface to read it better in the slanted light. The merchant's overseer unrolls his own tablet, written last market day, and sets it beside the first. Their fingers hover above the rows, following signs that match as if two hands had stitched the lines together already. Oil, jars, barley sacks, wool, lots. Now the cords speak. Each sack that left last week carried a fiber tie with a simple knot and a clay tag pressed with the storehouse seal and the merchant's mark. The overseer lays today's bundle of tags on the table, and together they count the not just tallies, but the small details each holds. A chip at the edge that means a particular jar, a diagonal scrape that the porter used as a reminder about a torn basket. Tags are warmed, softened slightly between palms to wake their patterns, then pressed gently against the tablet's blank band so the impression will carry the evidence of return. A seal on clay is not only a sign of giving, here it becomes a record of coming back. Where one tag is missing, the overseer produces a cord instead loop knotted in a way agreed upon for empty returned without tag. The clerk writes a short wedge cluster that means the same and leaves a small space for the guard's mark when he comes through. In a quiet aside of custom, goods traveled with language of their own cord types, knots, tagged shapes, small notches. Each made a sentence even when words were fewer. That way, if a document thinned or a memory dimmed, the cord itself could still be read by hands. The kiln keeper calls from the yard without raising his voice. Heat is ready to hold, not push. The clerk steps out. Air near the kiln feels like baked fruit. He lifts the board from the mouth for a moment to look at the color inside a warm, even glow rather than hot patches. The tablets show no shine, no damp beads, only a uniform dullness that promises a good bind. The board returns. The keeper slides in another cake of fuel and settles to his stool. Firing will stay moderate for long breaths, then fade. The tablets will cool inside the kiln's memory rather than out in a breeze. Back at the table, seals continue like small birds landing and lifting. The guard arrives and presses his witness mark lightly where the clerk left room. No lines are crowded. Every sign has breathing space. The overseer traces a arc over two rows that together form a single delivery, and the clerk mirrors that gesture with a wedge that means treated as one. They end by touching the bottom margin with the edges of their seals, not to blur the writing, only to lay a quite shared finish. Shelves learn a week at a time. After the reconciliation, the clerk lifts the older tablets in sequence and moves them back a hand's breadth on the boards. Thin clayers are pinched and pressed at their fronts, small tabs stamped with 2 or 3 signs, commodity space, day group. The effect is tidy without being stiff. From the eye you can see the weak step itself in shallow terraces, front to back. New work faces you, older work nods from behind with clear labels. If a question comes, a hand can find a day by its ear and pull the right memory forward. Midday pauses with the kiln doing its slow thinking and the room doing its gentle sums. The clerk writes a bridge tablet for the week just ended, a lean piece the length of his palm carrying only 4 lines, barley in, barley out, women, oil out with the simplest seals pressed along the bottom. This bridge sits at the shelf's edge like a card in a drawer, pointing to the fuller tablets behind it. The effect is like a soft index. The storehouse breathes easier when finding becomes touching rather than hunting. A small repair slips into the afternoon. One tablet dried with a tiny lift at a corner despite yesterday's care. The clerk moistens the spot with a cloth, sets a smooth shirt along the edge and weights it with a baked pebble. It rests there in the shade while other lines finish on it. By late day the corner yields to flatness and forgets it tried to rise. From the kiln comes an ending smell, a mix of reed, clean ash, and a hint of warm clay that is no longer fragile. The keeper lowers the flame to embers and sets the mouth ajar with the chip so cooling will be gentle. The tablets inside will stay there until daybreak. Cold air would rush them into a hurry they do not want. Overnight, color deepens by a shade and firmness settles all the way to the center. With accounts matched and shelves arranged, the week closes itself without announcement. The clerk gathers off, cuts a bowl of tiny scraps kneaded back into freshness, and seals the jar with a new cap. He presses to neat wedges on the lid and rolls a short edge of the storehouse seal across them so tomorrow we'll know which clay is which. The stylus lies in its jar tip up. The cylinder seals go back to their linen strips, each knot tied by feel, each bundle placed with its loop facing outwards so morning hands will smile. Evening is cool again. The gate stands half open. The awning's line is straight and dry. On the table a single shard reads, quietly done, pressed by a thumb that has learned a light, even touch. Lamps lower, footsteps soften. The storehouse rests like a book closed with a ribbon tucked. Exactly where the story paused. Dawn finds the kiln warm as a sleeping animal. The mouth stands open a finger's width. Air slips in and out without rush. When the keeper lifts the board aside, the glow has gone, leaving the patient color of baked earth. Tablets rest on their little tiles, as if they were always meant to be that shape. The clerk tests a corner with the back of a fingernail, no give, no sheen, only a soft rasp that says finished. One by one, the pieces come out to the reed tray. Each is cooler than it looks. The wedge tops catch early light. The impressions seem deeper now, not because they changed, but because dryness gives them shadow. The kiln keeper taps the tiles with a wooden stick, a habit that listens for cracks. Most answer with an even note. 2 are set aside to cool longer under cloth, not broken, only shy. The rest travel to the long table indoors and lie in a tidy line. Beside the table waits a broad-mouthed jar lined with peeled reed and thin shavings of baked clay. The lining is not for softness alone, it also invites air to move slowly around what will be stored. The jar smells faintly of last season's dust and fig leaf. A damp cloth wipes its lip to lift stray grit, then a ring of twisted fiber woven from date fronds it's ready to cushion a lid later. Before any tablet goes into this jar, a small ceremony of identification happens in simple touches. The clerk presses a short label no larger than a palm dated by signs for the month and the storehouse. The label's holes take a cord that will loop over the jar's neck later, sitting visible and kind to fingers. He also pinches 2 little ears of clay, each impressed with the week marks, to sit among the tablets as quiet guides once they are inside. The jar will be legible by feel as well as by sight. The first tablet into the jar is the bridge slender, with 4 careful lines that sum the week. It slides down against the reed lining and settles to one side. Next, the month's anchor list goes in, set upright like a thin book. A baked spacer follows a flat rectangle with no marks so edges won't meet hard. After that, the 2 fair copies find places with a breadth of reed between them. The little ears tuck near their weeks. The clerk does not stack tight. He arranges a small neighborhood inside the jar where air can stroll. Out on the shelf, the remaining dry records are sorted for proximity, daily tallies that will still be read often and should remain at hand, and older items that can sleep in storage. Those staying on the shelf receive new tabs pinched and stamped with a sign that means current. Those headed into jars take a brief visit to the scribe room for a quick glance, a last check that the W. Edge tips are intact and margins hold. A soft brush lifts dust, a palm smooths a blunt corner, and then they join the others by the jar's mouth. The stopper is made fresh. A round of clay is pressed into a shallow bowl to take its shape, lifted, and set on a reed ring to keep it honest while the surface is worked. The storehouse seal rolls around the edge like a belt. A small impression in the center repeats the month sign, and 2 holes are made near the rim for a tie. When the stopper goes on, the cord will pass through, then around the jar's neck, then through again, and finally receive a clay bead pressed with the guard's mark. The bead will dry there, a little sentinel that tells hands not to open without agreement. By mid-morning the archive corner has the look of a quiet garden, jars in a modest row, each with its cord tag and central seal, ears inside, and reed lids sheeted by a light cloth to discourage dust. The clerk writes a simple shelf sherd for each, impressed with a 2-sign phrase, and a scratch line that points toward the jar's place. Shards stand along the front edge of the shelf like small flags, useful even in low light. If weather turns damp again, cloths will drop over the line of jars. Today, air moves kindly, and the room keeps its soft cool. A merchant from yesterday returns for his baked copy. He holds it as one holds a plate, fingers spread to the rim, eyes reading as if tasting. He nods, makes room in his sack among dry leaves, and places the tablet on its side so the wedge faces won't rub the sack seams. He presses his seal lightly on a clay ticket that the clerk has prepared, nothing more than a receipt, but proof that a permanent record traveled into his care. The ticket is small enough to dry by evening. He will leave it with his own keeper, who will file it among cords. At midday, the month turns. There is no shutting of days here, only habits that slide from one sum to the next. To mark the change, the clerk sweeps the floor from shelf to threshold, then back again and empties his pan in the courtyard. A small lamp is lit for the ledger table, wick clipped short to make a calm flame. Bread is broken and shared, hard edge dipped in a little oil, and a pinch is set beside the clay jar and thanks with no speech. A handful of water crosses the threshold to the outside path to wish the lane an easy week. No gods are summoned by name in the room. The storehouse nods to the idea of care and continues. New tablets begin again as they did last month. Lumps of clay from the jar kneaded with water, shaped to ovals, smoothed by damp fingers. The stylus receives a fresh cut on its writing end. The off-cut is pushed into a scrap to remind the hand which edge is keen. A boy crosses with a tray of new tags, small, soft squares ready for seals. He sets them in a bowl near the cords and pinches one to practice the household mark. His result earns a small smile and a better lesson in the angle of the roll. Afternoon brings a different kind of counting, inventory of the tools themselves. Styluses are tallied, 3 with crisp tips, 1 to recut, sponges counted and dampened, brushes picked clean, string measured, and knotted at lengths that make sense for tags and jars. Cylinder seals are unrolled, named by their patterns in a whisper, star and bold, bird and plant, river and boat, and laid back with their loops turned outward for tomorrow's first reach. The kiln is brushed, tiles stacked with a thin reed between, and the mouth covered with a board so dust will choose elsewhere to settle. By late day the jar line looks set for a long, undisturbed sleep. Cords hold. Seals dry to a friendly hardness. The shelf sherds are legible from a step away. The clerk writes one last thin piece, a strip no longer than his palm, to sit at the front of the current shelf. It bears 4 wedges only, the month sign, the storehouse mark, and to small strokes that mean begun well. It is not boast. It is orientation. He steps out into the courtyard where warm air sits like a shawl. The gate stands open a half-width. Beyond, the lane leads past a low wall and a group of tiled roofs that catch the light like careful scales. Somewhere, water is being poured with the smooth sound of play against clay. The clerk wipes his hands on damp reed, caps the clay jar, and leaves the stylus in its place, standing up, ready. The storehouse holds its evening posture, jars breathing slowly, shelves quiet, the new month settled at the front like a patient child. The day folds without creases. And now, as we leave the shelves to their cool sleep, Let's follow the sound of water and the warmth of tile. When you're ready, we'll step through a wooden door at daybreak into an Ottoman Hamam, where steam lifts gently and marble answers with a soft echo. Before the first call of the day moves across rooftops, a single door opens and closes again with care. The Hamam still holds the cool of night. Stone remembers every footstep from yesterday but shows none. In the back court, beneath a small awning, the kiln-like furnace waits, its low mouth dark, its brick belly patient. A stoker lifts the lid of a clay jar, tips a little oil into a lamp, and sets the flame small. Light travels only as far as his hands need. Fuel has its order: split wood first, then shaved chips, then cakes pressed from old ash, and sweepings that know how to burn slowly. He builds a low nest in the furnace mouth and touches it with the lamp's tongue. Fire accepts without drama. As the small flame grows, the stoker slides a brick back into its notch, leaving a hand's width for air. Above the furnace, passages under the floors wait for heat the hypocaust, where warm breath will walk beneath marble and teach it kindness. Inside, the rooms keep their three-part story: a cool entry with benches and hooks, a warm middle chamber where air begins to carry softness, and the hot heart under a dome that gathers steam into a pale sky. The attendant walks the path a guest will later take, not to admire, only to notice. He lays a palm flat to the cool floor of the entry, then to a bench, then to the wall near the arch. He moves inward, testing the floor of the warm room with the back of his hand. Overnight, warmth has faded to memory. The furnace will change that soon. He opens small vents high on the walls with a pull of cord, to fingers only, then leaves them there to let night's breath finish walking out. Beside each basin a shallow marble bowl set on a shelf, fed by taps of hot and cold heat checks the copper ewers. Their lips must be smooth so they do not scald skin. He tilts one to hear the faint ring it gives when sound meets metal that is whole. He sets them upright on folded cloths so they won't learn to scratch the shelf. In a corner of the entry, linen waits in a chest, pestle towels with thin stripes at their ends, folded by habit into long, calm rectangles. The attendant lifts a stack and carries it to the warm room, placing each on a wide stone ledge high enough to keep away splash and low enough for easy hands. He leaves a small space between folds so steam will not make them cling. Near the towels he sets a basket of keys amidst the simple woven scrub gloves that will later turn skin clean and pink. A side note belongs here. People came to these baths not only to be washed, but to be welcomed into warmth. The tools of washing soap, knit, ewer were small courtesies arranged in reach. Back in the court the furnace grows serious. Heat begins its slow walk under the floor. The stoker listens with his hand on the tile above the flue. It answers with a warmth that has direction. He feeds the mouth with a quiet rhythm: wood pause, ash cake, pause, so the fire will never get ahead of itself. He cleans the ash lip with a short iron rake, the sound soft as dry grain in a pan. The dome receives the first thin ribbon of steam rising from water poured across a hot stone. It travels upward and disappears into the high curve. The hot room waits at the center, its marble platform gebektawi broad and low, a patient table for warmth and hands. The attendant wipes it with a long-handled cloth dipped in clear water. The cloth leaves a brief shine that turns to mist. He moves around the platform without letting his sandals chatter. At each Qanat basin, he tests the taps. Warm trickles answer, then hotter, then he returns them to stillness. Brass ladles line the edges in pairs, nested to keep their rims honest. Olive oil soap, made in small rectangular cakes, rests on dishes. Each cake carries a simple pressed square maker's mark, nothing proud. Doors have their own thinking. The outer door opens toward shade to keep the cool room cool. The inner door opens into warmth so heat will not rush out like an eager guest. He greases a hinge with a dab from a tiny pot and wipes the excess with a cloth that knows this task. He lifts the wooden squeegee or rake from its hook and draws yesterday's last damp toward the drain with 3 long passes. The sound is polite and regular. In the entry, the mango brazier stays quiet for now, its charcoal set but unlit. Later, when guests sit to rest, a low red will keep tea water kind and take chill out of wet hair. For the moment, the attendant sets cups upside down on a tray, checks a tin of dried mint and a small jar of rose water, then turns to the little desk where tokens live, flat wooden discs pressed with numbers for time and service. He counts them by touch, placing each into a shallow bowl. The bowl makes no noise. Heat reaches the first thresholds. Marble that felt like river stone begins to remember summer. The attendant walks the path again, this time slower. He places the side of his face near the wall in the hot room and listens. The dome speaks in tiny clicks as mortar and warmth find each other. He lifts a pestle and drapes it across the platform's edge so the cloth will warm a little. He checks a small basket of lemon slices near the cool room. Some guests like to add a piece to water after bathing, a little brightness after steam. If you stood here, the air would feel layered. A cool hush at the entry, a soft exhale in the warm room, a gentle, wet embrace in the hot. Light enters through small round openings in the dome like coins resting on water. The openings are glazed or left open depending on season. Today, they are closed to keep the rooms thinking inward. The patterns they lay on the marble are not decoration. They are a map of time, moving with the sun while the work inside keeps to its own pace. The stoker adds one last armful, then rests the iron on a hook to stay warm but not hot. He wipes his hands on a rag kept for smoke, then carries a bucket to a side basin and washes without fuss, letting water fall from ewer to palm to wrist. The Hamam runs on this constant, small housekeeping, warmth tended, surfaces rinsed, tools set back where a hand can find them without looking. Before opening, 2 attendants share the floor. One takes the warm room with a brush and pail, following the lines where wall meets tile, nudging away a fine gathering of dust. The other checks the drains with a slender rod, lifting any hair that found its way there yesterday and placing it in a small clay pot to be carried to the refuse heap. They speak little, saving their talk for gestures that matter. A nod toward a corner, a palm held flat to mean enough, a tilt of the chin to say later. The door latch lifts. The outer room receives a sliver of morning. The first guest will come soon, someone who knows that early heat is thoughtful, and rooms are quieter before the city wakes. Tokens will change hands. Pestle will unwrap. Water will meet skin with pleasant weight from a copper lip. For now warmth hums in the stone, the air, the palm. The first guest arrives the way day arrives, without hurry. Sandals pause on the threshold. A coin rests in a palm. A token slips from the attendant's shallow bowl with the soft click of wood meeting wood. Cloak, belt, and shirt find a peg. A pestle towel, light and long, wraps the waist and tucks once, then once again in a fold that knows how to stay. Modesty is part of the architecture here. Ledges are high enough for a sense of enclosure, and the path from cool to warm room turns on itself so eyes have places to rest. Water begins the conversation. In the warm room, the attendant fills a copper ewer from the tap, first a little cold, then a ribbon of hop testing with his knuckles, until the weight in the vessel announces a friendly heat. He pours a brief ladle over the basin's marble lip to temper it. Stone answers with a polite hiss, and then settles. The guest sits on a low stool, feet on a wooden grate so warmth can travel. 3 ladles over shoulders invite skin to loosen. The Hamam's voice is now a collection of small sounds. Water lifted, water falling, the soft rub of linen against stone, the breath of steam when a door remembers to close. In the hot room, the platform holds its steady warmth like a well-tended hearth. The guest lies on the gibbet tari on a pestle spread, cheek turned to the stone. Heat rises through cloth and finds tired places without insisting. Overhead, round glass eyes in the dome admit small pools of light. The vapor gives those circles soft edges, and the light moves at the pace of a roof-lying shadow outside. The attendant dampens a kiss knit-woven, not harsh, and rubs it lightly between his palms to smooth any stiffness left from drying. Scrubbing begins as language more than labor. Long, even strokes from shoulder to wrist, then small circles at the elbow, then a patient line along the side where skin is thinner and more thoughtful. Nothing is hurried, nothing repeated with force. The kiss is there to invite, not to argue. Flakes of yesterday's dust and city air roll away like fine pencil shavings. They gather at the edge of the pestle and stay out of the water's path. A side note sits well here. The kiss is not a secret punishment. It's a gentle tool. Proper used, it leaves no sting, only a smoothness that skin recognizes as relief. The dome holds the echo of each ladle. A brass scoop dips, rises, and pours over the back in a warm stripe that moves like a quiet river. Water finds the hollow at the base of the neck, then the slope of shoulder, then the small valley where back meets hip. The attendant tests the heat with his own wrist before each pour, steadying temperature like someone trimming a wick, never high, never low, always in the honest middle where the body softens. Olive oil soap enters the story as lather, not scent. A long-handled cloth meets a cake briefly. The cloth is worked in the attendant's hands until it puffs into a foam that looks like breath made visible. He lays the foam along arms and legs, then across the back in broad swaths. The cloth hisses gently as bubbles meet warm stone. Foam fills quiet hollows, and then thins, leaving a clean damp that makes the next passes of the kiss lighter still. If a guest prefers, the cloth slips off its stick and moves under the hand, short strokes on the forearm, a respectful curve around the ankle, a small polish at the heel. Between rounds the guest sits at the basin. Knees bend, pestle tucks again, and ladles of warm water lift and fall over hair, over face, over hands that have done week's work. The attendant offers a thin strip of linen for wiping around eyes, then rinses the basin's lip with a careful sweep so the next pour meets clean stone. Brushes for nails rest in a small dish. If needed, they serve for a moment and return. Nothing lingers where it does not belong. Elsewhere in the room, another guest lies on the platform, attended by younger hands. Their conversation is in gestures taught yesterday and the day before, a palm held flat to signal softer, a nod toward a shoulder to say there, a thumb rested lightly on the wrist to count a breath between pours. The dome makes their words into soft coins of sound that roll away and dissolve. Even laughter, when it appears, arrives like a warm towel, present and then folded. Back in the warm room, hair meets a small basin apart from the main. A wider toothed comb waits there, and a spoon of oil sits beside it, applied sparingly to ends, then rinsed away with water that remembers to be neither hot nor cool. The pestle at the shoulders is changed for a dry one with an easy sweep, and the first towel the head wrap, thin and eager to drink, finds its place like a turban. A second towel crosses the shoulders, a third takes the waist, a fourth lies across the bench to welcome sitting bones. The sequence is unremarkable and perfect. Towels are not counted aloud. They simply appear when hands open. Tea waits outside the warm air like a small reward. The mangle has woken, its charcoal glows without fuss. A kettle sits with a lid raised the width of a reed. The attendant pours into a glass no bigger than a palm clear, not scalding, then adds a mint leaf or a breath of rose water if asked. Salt for the body comes by olives or a bite of bread, sugar for the tongue, perhaps a piece of locum, the soft sweet that knows how to stick politely to fingers and let go to water. The guest sits by a window that opens to an inner court, watching steam drift through the frame and then forget itself against cold plaster. Between sips, the attendant gathers the mitt and cloth, rinses them at a separate basin reserved for tools, and hangs them where warm air can be useful but not greedy. He tips water along the tile edge so any soap that took an interest in traveling will change its mind. Drains twitch with tiny sounds and then settle. A long-handled brush makes a measured pass along the platform. The day is half housekeeping, half welcome, both share motions. Some guests prefer a massage after heat. Here it is a matter of palms, not elbows, and weight that thinks first. Oil light, threaded with lemon or laurel, meets the back in puddles no bigger than a coin. The attendant draws the oil outward, following lines the body already knows: neck to shoulder, shoulder to elbow, elbow to wrist, back to hip. No knot is challenged directly. The hand circles it slowly until it forgets to hold. The path out is the path in, reversed and drying. A last ladle over the feet thanks them. The pestimal gives way to dry linen. The peg offers clothing that feels newer because skin is new. The token returns to the shallow bowl. A coin rests in the attendant's palm and tells him the guest noticed the day's quiet. Shoes on, sandals tied. The door opens, and morning outside seems like a larger version of the warm room air. Moving voices wogue, the city's stone still storing the first hour's heat. Inside, steam lingers like a thought. Towels rest in the washroom, sorted by stripe. The casement hangs with its own weight, drying into tomorrow's patience. The dome's light coins slide a little farther across marble and pause. The Hamam keeps it steady. Breath. By late morning the bath finds its stride, not faster, only fuller. The door opens on a measured cadence to friends from the market, a tailor with thread still dusting his cuffs, a mother guiding a child by the hand. Tokens pass palm to palm with the same soft click as earlier, and pestimal stripes appear and disappear along the corridor like brief flags that do not want attention. Heat, now well seated under the floors, has learned the rooms again. The warm chamber breathes with an even pulse, bowls filling, bowls emptied, ladles resting, ladles waking. Benches begin to remember who prefers which corner. The tailor sits near the arch where sound is gentler. The two market men prefer the place by the brass tap that warms quickly. The mother settles where the stone ledge is wider so a child's feet can reach and not dangle. The attendant, passing with a ewer, tilts his head at a greeting made from long habit rather than ceremony. He knows how each guest likes the first pour, slightly warmer for one, slightly cooler for another, and matches it without asking. The hot room's platform receives brief visits and unhurried rests. Market men stretch on opposite sides, pestimal folded into pillows for necks. Their talk is made of weather and vegetables, how the eggplant's rounded, how parsley kept its green after the cool night, not as news to spread, only as a way to measure the season. Between sentences, water repeats its language across backs and shoulders. A boy learning the attendant's work stands a half step behind, watching how the keys grazes rather than scrapes, how the ladle tilts at the last moment so water does not surprise the ear. Families work in pairs. A child sits on a low stool at a basin, toes nudging the wooden grate like a toy. The mother wrings a cloth, brushes soap along arms with small, confident circles, and pours from a ladle with a care learned from being poured 4 years ago. The child's face tilts up at the dome where round windows hold pale light. The mother laughs once, the sound immediately softened by steam, and touches the child's nose with a wet fingertip. A side note that rests here: baths were not only for washing, they were steady places where people learned how to be with one another, where to wait, where to help, when to lower the voice, when to lift a cup. At the platform's edge, an older man prefers a seated scrub rather than lying down. The attendant folds a pestimal twice and lays it where the man's back will find it. Keys lines move in patient lengths down his arms. When the man raises a palm in the old sign for enough, the attendant answers with a nod and glides the mitt once more as a farewell, then rinses with two ladles that meet at the shoulder like a shallow V. The man sighs, not from effort but from release, and presses water from his beard with the firm passes of the fingers. Soap waits its turn again. Cakes with square marks were down in small, neat planes, never gouged. A long-handled cloth draws lather over calves and soles. Bubbles gather at the base of the basin and drift toward the drain in slow constellations. The dome's eyes keep their round calm. Where a drop from earlier has lingered along a glass rim, sunlight turns it to a dull coin and then erases it. The Hamam cleans itself through people, and people are cleaned by it. The exchange is gentle and constant. When guests move to the cool room, the day changes temperature without losing comfort. The cool room is not cold, only willing to remind the body it has a boundary. Benches line the walls, cushions lie along them at easy intervals. Hair wraps are changed for dry, shoulders find towels, as if they were waiting hands. The mangle has been coaxed to an agreeable glow. A kettle murmurs. Glasses clink lightly in a tray, not stacked, only arranged so each can be lifted by 2 fingers and a thumb. Tea and water do the hosting. A mint leaf collapses in the bottom of a glass and then floats again. A drop of rose water wakes the idea of a garden. An attendant brings a plate of small things that know how to sit quietly: brined olives, 2 narrow triangles of cheese, sliced cucumbers breathing damp from a cloth. Guests snack without ceremony, each bite followed by a pause as if the mouth wants to listen too. Conversation runs on those easy rails where today meets yesterday. A baker mentions flour that felt lighter. A porter speaks about a stubborn wheel. A seamstress notes that her thimble finally polished smooth. Combs, simple and wide, ride in a low basket lined with cloth. They return to the basket after a pass through hair and a rinse at a narrow basin kept for that. No one rushes their drying. A woman rubs a few drops of oil along the ends of her hair, then wraps it again with a towel so the oil can think in peace. Somewhere a child counts holes in a wooden screen, loses track when a dove calls from the court, and begins again, content to never finish. The cool room holds small acts of service that feel like nothing and make everything easier. An attendant drapes a fresh pestle across a guest's shoulders without asking, sensing a draft near the door. Another lifts a towel from under a sleeping child's cheek so the fold will not crease the face. Cups are refilled before requests form. A slipper that wandered under a bench is nudged back into reach with a toe. All this occurs in that temperate, almost invisible way that turns a place into a habit. Meanwhile, the warm room keeps its workman's rhythm. Scrub mitts are washed and hung. Basins are swirled with a final pour so nothing grows tired of staying. The wooden squeegee leans from its hook, a promise for later. A young attendant practices the angle of the ladle at the wrist under an elder's eye, the same motion again, until the elder closes his hand gently over the younger's and says good without a word. At midday's exact center, there is a lull that belongs to the building. Steam thins to a veil. The dome lets down a wider light. The stoker feeds only ash cakes and rests the wood to one side. The platform keeps warmth like bread holds heat after an oven door is shut. If you pass a hand an inch above marble, you can feel temperature without touching it. If you sit and close your eyes, the sound resolves into a pattern. Ladle, drip, cloth, footstep, whisper, cup, breath repeating in kind order. An acquaintance arrives with a bundle of freshly laundered pestamos, stripes aligned. She opens the cloth and spreads them with a movement that looks like setting birds free. The linen feels cool and sturdy. A few older towels, edges softened by many washings, are folded separately for those who prefer the familiar weight. A note is made, not in ink but by placing a particular stripe on top the signal for use these first. When guests rise to go, the cool room sees them out quietly. Towels collect in baskets. Tokens return to the shallow bowl. Coins come and go without clatter, sandals meet feet with a dry whisper. The door opens onto early afternoon, and the street looks brighter than before because eyes have learned shade. Inside, the Hamam continues breathing as it has for hours, steady, domestic, almost thinking. The marble keeps its soft heat. The basins retain a ring of cool at their rims. The attendants make small repairs no one will notice, tightening a hinge pin, trimming a wick, lifting a thread from a drain. The day is not half done, it has simply deepened. Afternoon arrives as a long, level light that climbs the walls and rests in the dome's round eyes. The Hamam does not change its voice. It lowers it. Heat holds steady without asking for attention. Footsteps slow, then spread out, and the rooms find the comfortable spacing of a place that knows its work. In the cool room, a corner belongs to the barber's things: a low chair with arms, a small folding table, and a cloth bundle that opens like a well-rehearsed story. A strop hangs from a peg. The razor sleeps in its sheath, on a steel that sees water only when it must and oil when the day ends. Combs lie in a row, teeth wide to narrow. A tiny bottle of bay rum sits beside a jar of pomade that remembers laurel and lemon. The barber heats a towel on the edge of the mangle, tests it against his cheek, then drapes it lightly over a guest's jaw and neck. The cloth is not hot, only agreeably warm. A breath later, stubble softens. The razor's work is quiet. Lather from olive oil soap, beaten in a small bowl, floats like a mild cloud, and the blade moves in short, considered strokes that interrupt no one. Between passes, the barber lays the razor on the table on a folded cloth so its edge will never meet wood. He wipes with a corner of towel, not to rush, only to keep the line clean. A side note fits gently here: barbers in these rooms were keepers of small order: trimmed beards, tidy hairlines, neat brows, ear spoons that removed what the week gathered, all done with hands trained to steadiness. Nothing dramatic, everything careful. Near the barber's corner, a second chair hosts quiet grooming. Thread unwinds from a spool and becomes a soft-looking loop that Titty's brows with small, practiced catches. Scissors trim a mustache a breath at a time. A comb's wide teeth pass through damp hair, then narrow teeth follow as a kind of punctuation. When oil is offered, it arrives on fingertips, no more than a drop to the palms, pressed and drawn along hair ends until shine appears like a polite thought. Back toward the warm room, attendants keep their measured pace. Basins are wiped between guests with a long sweep of cloth. Taps are opened only as far as they need to be, then closed so the marble lip will stay dry between pores. The keysmiths that have finished their work are rinsed at a side basin reserved only for tools, then hung where warm air will remember them. Long-handled cloths, wrung once, then twice, return to their pegs. Nothing remains on the floor longer than a moment. The wooden grate near each stool is lifted, shaken, and replaced so water will not learn to wait there. The hot room relaxes into a softer use. Fewer bodies lie on the gibbet tari at once. The platform stays warm, as if a sunbeam had chosen to live there. A guest rests on one hip and watches the dome's round eyes collect afternoon. The glass is duller now, and the light enters in even coins. The attendant pours from a brass ladle with the same angle he used in the morning. Muscle remembers. Water lands like a welcome hand on a shoulder that has asked to do less. On some afternoons, the barber brings his cup small bells of glass that warm the skin and persuade tightness to let go. He sets them briefly along shoulders and back, no more than a few. They lift away and leave round, harmless marks that fade. There is no fuss in it, only a sense that the day has been met and answered. Afterward, a thin oil goes on, and the palm presses outward in slow, even lines. When the guest rises, they move as if the floor had given them a little of its kindness. Housekeeping steps forward as the quieter guest. The stoker feeds the furnace with ash cakes and rests the wood on the dry side. Evening will ask less. He draws a small iron across the ash lip to keep air paths honest. In the warm room, an attendant checks each drain with a slender rod and finds two strands that thought to linger. They are lifted and placed in a clay pot destined for the heap outside. Marble seams along the floor meet a soft brush dipped in clear water, not to scour, only to invite any soap dust away. The rakel squeegee rehearses its evening passes long, straight, and unhurried. Fresh pestimals arrive in a cloth bundle tied with a flat nut that opens in one tug. Stripes align as they are stacked. The narrowest stripes go to the head wraps, the wider ones to waists and shoulders. Older towels' edges softened by many laundries are folded to one side and kept in reach for guests who prefer a familiar weight. A tiny ember from the mangle is coaxed to readiness. The kettle lifts and returns, lit askew the width of a reed. Inventory is done with touches more than numbers. Soap cakes are counted by stacks 1, 2, 3 and a chalk line on a shelf. Edge notes use these first. Keys knits are paired for tomorrow. Rougher woven ones for those who ask, softer for those who do not. Wooden clogs that protect feet in wet places are aligned by the door. Pairs with tired straps go to the bench for mending. A hinge hears a drop of oil and quiets. A latch that clicked too sharply learns to land with a whisper. In the cool room, afternoon talk slings to threads. A man speaks about an orchard whose figs have begun to sweeten. A woman describes a bolt of cloth that took dye cleverly. A boy tells the barber he wants his hair like his elder brother's, then forgets and watches steam travel instead. Glasses lighten, are refilled and returned to the hand they left, as if they had been waiting to do so. A piece of locum is cut with the back of a spoon so the knife will stay where it belongs. The plate returns to the tray with one olive missing as if it had never been there. Sun finds the dome's eyes at a new angle and sends longer ovals along the platform. The Hamam reads the change and answers without a word. Fires settle. The hot room releases a small portion of its heat to the warm room, which carries it gently to the cool. Doors open a finger, then close, breathing the building. The attendant tests the marble once more with the back of his hand and nods to himself. Evening will come kindly. Before the lull, there is a last brief busy hour. Workers who close their stalls early arrive with dust on their cuffs and gratitude in their shoulders. The sequence repeats: pestimel, basin, ladle, keys, foam, rinse, rest. The barber trims a line, a brow, a mustache. A child squeezes water from her wrap and watches it fall in a bright rope, then disappear. The attendant wipes the basin lip and lays the ladle across it so the handle will keep its curve. When that hour passes, the rooms grow, if anything, more themselves. Marble glows softly, steam thins to a haze that leaves all edges kind. The squeegee makes its first long pass of the evening along the floor of the hot room, gathering what they left politely. Basins are rinsed, taps left dry, cups turned. The mangle keeps a low cool so tea can continue in the cool room for those who like to linger and talk in the tone that night approves. By the time the barber rolls his strop and oils the razor for sleep, the bath has reset itself without drama. Towels are folded, tools hang in their places, the furnace breathes as if it, too, is ready to rest. The door remains open for a few slow guests. But the building's posture has changed from receiving to keeping. Evening gathers like a shawl placed carefully over the rooms. The Hamam does not stop, it completes. Sound narrows to essentials: ladle, footfall, small talk softened by steam. A final guest steps out from the hot room with a towel at the shoulders and one around the waist, hair wrapped in a thin twist that keeps a line of water from the neck. The token returns to the shallow bowl with a rounded click. A coin rests in the attendant's palm. It leaves a small cool circle there and no need for words. The closing begins with light. Lamps are trimmed until the flames sit lower than their wicks, round and steady. In the hot room the dome's glass eyes have gone from bright to pewter. They return the lamp glow and quiet petals that barely reach the platform. The mangle keeps only a sleepy coal for the last glasses of tea. A kettle lid tilts the width of a reed and then settles. Steam becomes suggestion rather than speech. Towels learn their puffs. Used pestimals go to the wash corner sorted by stripe so pairs will find each other easily tomorrow. The heaviest pieces, damp from shoulder and waist, are folded once along the length and squeezed gently with both arms as if hugging water out of cloth. They rest in a wicker basket lined with an older towel that knows how to carry weight. Head wraps, lighter and quicker to dry, hang on a cord with space between, each clipped by a wooden peg smooth from years of fingers. The room smells briefly of linen and clean damp, then fades back to stone and warm air. Water is told where to go. The long-handled squeegee, the rake, comes off its hook for its evening work. An attendant draws it in unbroken lanes from wall to drain. The rubber lip whispers across marble. Every pass begins and ends beyond the visible wet so edges will not learn to keep a bead. Round each basin, a cloth wraps the lip, moves once clockwise, once the other way, then lifts. Ladles are left to dry with their bowls tilted, handles resting on folded cloth so curves keep their memory. A slender rod checks drains a last time. Anything that thought to stay is invited onward. The furnace receives its last kindness. The stoker lays one ash cake at the mouth and draws the iron across the lip to keep air clear. He sets the wood aside, slides the brick in to narrow the opening, and leaves the smallest breath for the hypocaust to sigh out its stored warmth. In the warm room, vents high in the wall open a finger's width. The building changes its posture from holding heat to holding quiet. The floor keeps a pleasant temper underfoot, not demanding shoes, not nudging bare skin to notice. Tools return to their habits. Keys mitts are rinsed in the side basin set aside for them alone, each turned inside out under clean stream and then righted, the weave patted, the loop smoothed. They hang by their cords with a thumb space between neighbors. Long-handled cloths need a brief wash, then a twist without anger, then the peg. The barber draws his strop twice more than he needs to, not because the blade is dull, but because ritual keeps the next morning simple. Oil finds the hinge that clicked at midday. A latch is lifted and dropped until it learns a softer landing. The cool room closes with gestures that look like hosting and are really filing. Cushions are shaken once, the corners nudge towards square. Glasses stand upside down on a cloth that dries them by drawing, not rubbing. The tea tin's lid clicks shut, the jar of rose water sits back in its place with the label toward the wall, because the hand knows the jar by heft. A small brush collects crumbs from the low table. They fall into the palm and disappear into a clay pot for the courtyard birds. Inventory is counted by touch, not voice. Soap cakes in the niche, 1, 2, 3 stacks, a chalk mark on the ledge. Use these first. Pestimal piles, wider stripe on top for waists, narrow stripe on top for heads. Wooden clogs by the door, matched pairs, free to a row, straps checked with a tug that asks and answers. Tokens returned to the bowl, their numbers easy to learn by the weight of wood in the hand. When the count feels one short, a glance finds it on the barber's table under the comb. It returns without comment. If repair must be done, it is small and finished before sleep. A loose cord on a peg is retied with a flat nut that opens into pulls. A hairline chip on a basin lip receives a smoothing stone and a breath of water. A thin draft near the outer door meets a rolled cloth laid along the sill. The building seems to nod less as gratitude than as recognition. It knows the shape of its own con. In the wash corner, laundry begins its patient life. A tub takes warm water and a shaving of soap. Towels sink and rise, pressed rather than wrung, then folded against the board where hands learn weight by forearms. Lint gathers at the edge and is caught with a comb kept for this job. After the wash, water pours to the channel that leads outdoors, and the tub is rinsed with a ladle so tomorrow's first batch won't meet yesterday's memory. Towels that will be dried here hang under the eaves where night air travels. Others, heavier, are packed to go out to the fuller's place at daybreak. When the rooms are nearly empty, there is a moment that belongs to the Hamam alone. The hot room holds one more breath of warmth. The warm room takes it down and spreads it. The cool room accepts and keeps it level with the air. Lamps sit like small moons behind glass. The dome's eyes watch nothing. They are watched by the floor in faint reflections that seem like dew. The last guest leaves a wet footprint that evaporates before the latch finds its home. Closing words, when spoken, are quiet and ordinary. "Good night," says one attendant to another, not as an ending but as a gentle fold in the day. The stoker places the iron on its hook and wipes his hands on the rag that knows smoke. The barber turns his razor in the lamplight and smiles at the edge he has kept. A pestle, forgotten on a bench, is lifted and laid in the right basket. The door, open to let the evening in, moves back to the jamb and meets it without sound. The Hamam sleeps with its back straight. Floors dry, basins empty, tools ready. Warmth lingers under stone like a story that can be resumed at the right line. In the alley, the air feels cooler than it is inside. Above, the sky exchanges its last pale blue for a color that does not need a name. Inside, the marble remembers feet and will welcome them again. As the steam thins and lamps go to embers, let's step from warm marble to a small table by a narrow window. When you're ready, we'll open paper packets of glass and sit with a Venetian bead worker, where color rattles softly and thread measures the world one quiet length at a time. Morning leans through a narrow window and lays a pale rectangle on the table. Outside, water moves against stone with a soft, habitual sound. A small room breathes in the same rhythm. Lime-washed wall, a chair that knows one back, a wooden table that keeps the day's tools near the right hand. The air carries to quiet scents. Cooled glass and a touch of beeswax. On the table waits a shallow tray, lined with cloth that once was part of a skirt. Its edges rise just enough to keep small things from traveling. Beside it, a few paper packets lie like folded birds, each creased to hold a color. Their corners are tied with thin thread, their paper carrying faint dust that will become brightness when it is asked to. A needle rests across a spool of thread. The needle's eye a patient oval. A lump of wax sits near the spool, pale and square, its surface rubbed smooth by many passes. The bead worker an empireressa, a stringer empties the first packet without tearing the paper. Inside wait tiny glass beads, no larger than seeds. They pour into the tray with a soft rattle, then settle and become quiet. The color today is a deep blue that reads as shade more than sky. When the tray is tilted a little, the beads slide like very fine sand and stop in a low drift. Another packet opens and adds a second blue, slightly milky, a tone that will keep the first from looking too stern. A third packet, smaller, offers a modest white. Thread comes next. A length is drawn from the spool and laid along the palm to measure span from wrist to a little beyond the elbow, plus 2 fingers for comfort. The end meets the wax and travels through it once, then a second time, so flying fibers will learn to stay polite. The thread is turned and the other end meets wax too. The needle's eye receives the thread without fuss, a practiced pairing. A knot appears at the far end, small and flat, pressed between fingernails so it will sit like a pebble, not a lump. Sorting is its own beginning. The beads in the tray are encouraged into lanes by a soft brush made from cut bristles tied with string. Larger ones roll to one side, smaller ones to another. Imperfections of bead with a closed hole, a chip that might scratch the thread, move politely to the tray's corner to be dealt with later. The hand learns size by sight and by sound. The larger beads click louder when they meet, the smaller whisper. A side note fits here like a pin. Much of this work is counting by listening, lengths measured in handfuls of sound, heaps weighed by how they move when the tray tilts. The first thread travels. The needle dips into the line of blue and finds the hole in the first bead by feel more than by aim. Then the second bead, then a pause while the fingers slide the small row toward the knot. The rhythm builds like quiet breathing: dip, find, slide, dip, find, slide. The beads line up with their tiny edges touching, forming a cord of color no thicker than a shoelace. Every so often the fingers pinch the line and draw the beads backward gently to settle them. The waxed thread remembers to resist fray. Hands remember to rest. Lengths are not guessed. They are known by a measure stick, a smooth slat marked with shallow notches. When the new strand reaches a certain notch, the thumb rests on the place and the other hand makes the flat knot that will close the loop. The knot lies against beads without forcing them apart. A second knot kisses the first, less for strength than for company. The loop is hung over a peg at the tray's lip. It is the first of many. 10 loops become a small bouquet, a mazza that later will be tied loosely with thread and set aside on a clean cloth. Piecework is counted in such families of loops. The measure sits light in the hand. Color alternates. After 2 lines of the deeper blue, a line of the milk blue rests the eye. A few whites are chosen to enter every 4th set, not as pattern, only as a quiet surprise that keeps a buyer's glance for a breath longer. The stringer tilts the tray now and then so the colors mix along a different edge, keeping the hand from repeating by habit alone. In the corner, the imperfect beads have gathered into a small hill. Later they will be re-examined. Some can be saved. Some will become a little spill of brightness in a jar on the sill, nothing wasted. A neighbor's voice passes along the canal and disappears under a bridge. The room does not answer. The needle continues its small journey. A child might sit on the floor nearby with wooden buttons and a stub of thread for practice, but today the room is only the worker and the tray. The chair is low, the table is high enough to save the neck. The light from the window falls on the beads without glaring. In summer, the shutter would be turned so the beam is broken. In winter, the table would move closer to catch warmth. Today the light is an even kindness. A pause arrives for hands. The needle is set across the wax. The wrists lift and circle each other once. The fingers open and close slowly as if squeezing water from a cloth. A cup of water stands near the sill. 2 sips are enough. The tray receives a little tap at its corner. The beads adjust their surfaces like birds resettling their feathers. Work resumes, not as a start, but as a continuation of a thread that never needed to be tied off. There is a small book in the drawer, not much more than folded paper. It holds the day's simple sense, which colors arrived, which loops were finished, whether a certain size ran short. The stringer does not reach for it each time a thought passes. Instead, at the end of a group of loops, a pencil writes a short line, 3 marks, and a letter, and the book slides closed with a sound like fabric moving. Payment will be counted by such lines at week's end, by the weight of finished bundles, by a tally at the warehouse. A gentle aside, piecework like this travel between home and factory. The city's color moved through rooms like this one loop at a time. By late morning, the peg hosts 3 small bouquets. Each mazzo is tied with a different color thread to say deep, milk, or mixed. They rest on a cloth by the window for a breath so any stray dust will choose to fall away. The worker gathers the imperfect beads and considers them again under the better light. A few prove themselves worthy and return to the tray. The rest find the jar on the sill. The jar will someday go to a child or to a neighbor who stitches cloth and enjoys a sprinkle of color along a hand. The needle's point meets the wax's edge one more time, then glides through the first beads of the next loop. Outside, water nudges stone and moves on. Inside, thread carries sky-colored glass toward a length that will travel farther than this room ever. Wool, the hand guides, the eye agrees, and the day learns its long, even line. By late morning the table has learned a steady pattern. Thread measured, waxed, beaded, tied, and hung, small bouquets of loops resting on the ped like soft wreaths. Now the work changes scale. The mazzy those little bouquets are gathered into longer families the warehouse will recognize. The stringer clears a corner of the table and lays down a measure stick longer than the first one, polished by years of hands. Along one edge, tiny notches sit at even intervals. Along the other, shallow grooves mark where ties should fall. Each mazzo is lifted and turned so the knots all look the same way. Then 5 are laid together to make a small coil. A narrow thread passes around them once, twice, and ties with a flat knot that lies low and does not pinch. 3 coils become a hank. The hank's ties go at quiet places, one near the top to keep loops from sliding, one near the bottom to keep their roundness honest. The finished hank rests in the palm with a satisfying weight that tells the hand without counting, "This is enough for that order." A side note fits gently here, though numbers ruled such work. Touch was the first rule. Pieces were counted by how they filled a hand, by how they draped over a wrist, by the way they sighed when set down. Color begins to marry color. Export orders prefer a conversation rather than a single voice, deep blue with a quiet milk blue and a pale white, or perhaps amber with a thread of green to cool it. The stringer builds marriages on the table edge, 2 hanks of the main shade, 1 of the companion shade, then a slim bundle of the accent. She unknots and readies as needed so the trio hangs together like friends walking. When she lifts them, they settle in a braid-like fall that will please the warehouse clerk's eye and make packing simpler. Labels are small and inarguable. A strip of paper carries for marks, a letter for the factory, a number for size, a tiny sign for color, family circle for blues, triangle for reds, square for greens, and 1 short line for the day. The strip threads under the top tie and returns on itself in a neat tuck. The pencil that made the marks places 1 more dot at the corner. That dot is the stringer's quiet signature, the way she will know her work when hanks later hang in rows at the weighing room. Before the delivery walk, the table dresses itself for absence. The tray slides under cloth so passing air will not toss a bead into a crack. The needle crosses the wax and sleeps. The spool is tucked into a small bag with its edge turned down. Imperfect beads go to their jar on the sill. The window shutter turns a finger's width to keep the room from learning too much heat while no one watches. The chair pushes back with a friendly creak. A scarf goes over the shoulders, the bundle of hanks wraps in paper and threads under the arm like a book. Outside, the day moves on mended water. Steps take the stone bridge by the corner shop, then the narrow passage under a building where sound changes shape, then a small square where pigeons occupy the sunny part and people the shade. The bundle stays low and close, not hidden, just kept from brushing against passers-by. A boatman eases his craft with a foot on the wall. His hand rests on a pole that knows the city's weight. Voices greet one another by nod, by good day, by nothing at all that still means company. The warehouse is never far, yet always reached by a few extra turns. Its door wears a brass plate rubbed to dull shine by many hands. Inside, boards stretch on trestles. The long one-wall pegs keep hanks in categories that make sense to the clerks, size first, then color, then maker. A scale lives at the center like a polite judge to plate Sabine, a set of little weights that sit in a tray by size. The clerk's pencil rests behind an ear, the ledger lies open to receive lines. The bundle opens like a parcel of quiet. Hanks lift and hang on a temporary peg. Paper strips show themselves and are noted. The clerk counts without telling the room he is counting. Fingers slide to the tie, feel the loop's number. The beam rises, falls, settles. The pencil writes a small equation no one will read twice. From time to time he tests a loop with a wood rod, sliding beads from knot to confirm that thread has not learned to catch or twist. Everything answers with calm. Quality has a voice you can hear. A good loop slips along the rod without snag. Beads meet without grinding. The waxed thread whispers rather than squeaks. If a mistake hides a knot too proud, a bead with a sharp bite, the stringer sees it before the clerk does and replaces the loop from her bag. No fuss. The return goes back with her, not his fault, only his next work. At home the troublesome bead will be lifted and the looper tied with a knot flatter and kinder. A gentle aside. In this exchange, pride is quiet. The warehouse prefers steady hands to urgent perfection. The city runs better that way. Payment is a stack of small paper slips rather than coins. Today notes she will trade at week's end. The ledger brightens with short lines that mean Hanks received, sizes, colors, and the day. The stringers mark the dot, sits in a column where clerks can reckon who did what at season's turn. A new packet of beads crosses the table to her, greens this time, and the pale yellow that will soften them. The clerk adds a coil of thread and a square of wax. These are accounted for with a mark as well. Everything matched to everything. She leaves with her paper app beads and crosses back by a different bridge because city paths are braided and repetition sometimes needs a little variety. The bundle under her arm rattles softly, the good, dry sound of beads greeting one another. A neighbor calls from a window to ask whether the milky blue pleased the clerk. She nods and lifts the corner of her paper to show the green and yellow. And a small conversation floats between the two walls about how those colors walk together. Green, yellow, maybe a breath of white every third loop. At home the shutter leans inward. The room feels like a hand cupped around light. Packages set down, the table becomes a work surface again in 3 small gestures. Cloth off the tray, needle lifted, wax square turned so a new face meets the thread. The new colors enter the tray like a shallow tide. Green beads slide and settle, yellow follows like late sun. A test loop begins, 5 green, 1 yellow, 5 green, 1 yellow. Then, after a couple of repeats, a white to keep the eye awake. She tries a different spacing and likes it better. 3-1, 3-1, and a white after 4 sets. The pattern stays quiet and speaks kindly. Midday becomes afternoon without anyone announcing it. A neighbor's knock brings 2 slices of bread and a small onion wrapped in paper. They share a corner of the table and a few minutes of talk about a child's stubborn shoe and a seam that did not want to lie flat. The stringer eats in small bites between loops. Crumbs brush into the palm and out the window to the canal where the smallest fish think for a moment and then forget. The last task before the light changes is to set aside completed hanks for a different order, darker tones together, no white, a little more weight in each bundle. The label strip changes, the shape for color family, the letter for factory, the dot at the corner that says mine. The pencil writes one last short line in the folded book, 3 marks, and the letter and the book closes for now. Outside, water knocks gently at stone. Inside, the needle enters the next bead as if it had been waiting there all along. The room has learned the day's second rhythm. New colors, same measured length, hands moving exactly as much as needed and no more. Rain arrives as a soft rearrangement of the window. The canal wears a new skin, circles and side circles that meet and forget. Light turns even and kind. The room notices by becoming smaller in a pleasant way, like a shawl pulled closer. On the table, colors deepen. Green looks more leaf than glass, yellow more rind than sun. The stringer shifts her chair a finger's width so the beam that used to lie along the tray now rests across her wrist. The needle can be seen without asking you eyes to try. Rain favors company. A neighbor taps at the door with the rhythm. Everyone uses a knuckle, a pause, then a nail. She steps in with her own paper bundle and a child who carries seriousness like a kitten, carefully and not for long. They spread a cloth across the table's far side and pour their color small reds of brown that reads as warm bark, and a handful of black beads that want to roll farther than the rest. The child receives a simple task, rescuing runaway beads with a little brush and pushing them back into a friendly hill. He performs it with the solemn joy of early responsibility. Wax meets thread again. Damp air asks for an extra pass, so the length travels through the square twice, then a third time for the first nut's sake. The neighbor prefers a different habit. She draws the thread along a cake of soap first and only then kisses it with wax. Her loops sit slightly gentler on the line, the wax less forward. Both ways work and neither argues. A side note sits comfortably here. Such rooms held many correct methods. Work taught hands, and hands answered back until a pace suited the person who moved them. Patterns marry across trays for orders that want something particular. The warehouse has asked for a market braid. 3 hanks of green, 1 of yellow, a breath of white, every fourth looped together with a separate bundle of red and brown, to travel in the same crate but not be confused. The stringer lays a hank of green, then another, then a third, and wraps a slim yellow bundle across them diagonally. The neighbor ties the stack with a flat knot, then adds a paper strip threaded under the tie and folded back on itself. The strip bears the usual marks: factory letter, size, number, color sign, and a small pencil. Rain, not official, only a memory for later, that the day made glass look like leaves. The child counts loops by touching them one by one around a rod, a simple dowel kept for this purpose. He gets to 12 and forgets and starts over. No one minds. Counting that begins again still counts. When the rod is full, the loops slide off and rest in a cloth bowl. The neighbor tells him to place the bowl on the chair. He places it on the chair and then sits on the floor instead, where the cat will almost certainly visit. Packing for far water begins in small folds. Paper sheets, thin but tough, lie in a stack near the tray. A handful of hanks settles on one sheet, their ties lined like stitches. Another sheet goes over them, then a turn from left, a turn from right, a fold up, a fold down. The packet receives a single pass of cotton twine and a knot that will open with a sensible pull later. The pencil writes a neat line across the top corner. The dot returns to say mine. The packet makes a sound like leaves when lifted. It rests in a basket by the door, one of a set that knows this path between rooms and warehouse, between tables and scales. Rain makes the city's sounds rounder. Oars knock stone more softly. Footsteps overhead find a slower interval across the ceiling. A sailor on the bridge lowers his voice without knowing. The child falls asleep against the cat, who agreed to the arrangement, as if he had thought of it first. The stringer finishes a loop and places it with its family. The neighbor examines a bead whose hole looks shy. She sets it aside and replaces it without comment. Imperfect beads go to a glass jar that catches the day's dim light and turns it into a small, moving brightness when someone passes. Lunch visits as an intermission of bread and the idea of cheese. 2 thin slices arrive under paper from a friend next door. They sit on the table between trays like small pauses. A knife with a blunt nose divides one slice exactly and the other roughly. Both are acceptable divisions. Tea water is brought to the simmer in a tin pan over a single charcoal, the window opened a finger so steam can consider leaving. Cups are small and forgiving. Lemon peel, left from yesterday, remembers its job. Work resumes with the room even quieter than before, the rain heavier in sound but lighter in spirit. The neighbor's hands favor the smaller beads, now her needle finding holes that seem to find to be useful, until they admit the thread after all. The stringer's needle keeps to the green order, 1 yellow after 3 greens, a white after 4 sets. From time to time she lifts the growing loop against the measure stick, the notch repeats its truth, and the knot appears under her thumbnail as if it had been waiting there. When the rain slackens, the window opens wider. Air moves across the table and persuades a few beads to travel. The child wakes long enough to catch 2 and misses the third, which the cat politely pretends not to see. The neighbor wraps her finished hanks in paper. The stringer adds her market braid bundles to the basket. They share the walk, 2 baskets on 2 arms, steps in time across the small bridge, down the passage that leans against the canal, or on the square where puddles reflect the underside of umbrellas like second bridges. The weighing room greets rain as an old friend. Boards smell newer in damp air. The scales plates shine a little more. The clerk shakes a corner of a towel over the beam to chase a drop, then smiles without change. Bundles open, hanks lift to pegs, paper strips show their proof, the pencil writes. The child watches the small weights move from tray to tray, trying to imagine how something so still can tell such firm stories. A crate nearby holds cured paper cones that will later cradle hanks for long travel. Each cone wears a tiny brush mark of paste and a stamp the size of a ring fingernail. Crates like these cross oceans on ships, but the rune speaks of them as if they simply go out, the way a person steps into the street and returns evening. Payment does not occur now, it lives at week's end, the ledger's calm arithmetic. Today is the sliding of work from one set of hands to another and the return of supplies, new packets of color, thread, wax. The stringer receives a surprise to small bags of a blue-green. The clerk says ships sooner have tied with white companions. She nods and writes nothing. The pattern has already begun inside her hand. Back home, late light finds the window. Rain has tucked the room to enjoy gray. The table knows its evening posture. Tray forward, wax square turned, needle lifted. The neighbor and child depart with their basket. The door closes with the same 2-part rhythm, and quiet resumes the day it was telling before company came. The cat inspects the jar of imperfect beads, then sits with his back to the tray in the exact way that says I am not interested and never was. The new blue-green enters the cloth tray with a sound like a cup set down gently. A white is added, and then a test. 3 blue-greens, 1 white, 3 blue-greens, pause, 3 again. The measure stick agrees. The knot lies flat, in the street. Rain decides to finish. The canal forgets circles inside, loops lengthen toward travel. And the room learns another steady hour. Evening edges into the room by degrees. The pale rectangle on the table fades to a gentler square, then to nothing. The window holds the last of the day like a shallow bowl holds water. A lamp is lifted from its shelf and trimmed with a thumbnail. Wick short, flame round enough to show the needle's eye and not wake the walls. Light pulls on the tray and leaves the rest in a respectful dusk. Work changes shape under lamplight. Loops finished during rain come out for inspection. Each is drawn smoothly along a dowel, bead against bead, so the thread's path admits no hesitation. Where a bead nips the line with a tiny sharp edge, the needle is coaxed backward to lengths. The bead is slipped off with a quiet click. Another takes its place from a small saucer of reserves kept for mending. The knot is teased, flattened with a fingernail, and allowed to sit again as if it had never risen. A side note belongs softly here. Repair at day's end is not confession. It is continuation, undoing 3 moments to preserve 300. Wax meets thread again, but lighter now. Under warm light, too much wax reflects and tires the eye. The length passes over the square once, not twice, and the thread remembers to behave. The needle drinks lamp glow and shows its point as a pin of gold. The first few beads of a test loop sit like seeds in a shallow furrow. The measure stick lies across the table's top edge. The notch that governs evening length is a thumb width closer than the day's, kinder to hands that have already done their share. A knock with a spoon against wood speaks the neighborhood's language, for I brought something small. The door opens on a friend who carries a low basket lined with paper. She unpacks it like unrolling a story. One packet of white beads finer than rice, another of a warm brown that tells of earth more than chocolate. A pinched envelope labeled in a clerk's tidy hand, to be tried, and a remnant of thread dyed a shy rose. They settle at the table edge under the lamp's reach. Patterns are traded the way recipes are, half by words, half by showing. The friend lays out a loop from her work, brown, brown, a pause, then white again, making the brown look warmer and the white less quick. The host answers with the new blue-green and a white that arrives only every fourth breath. They lift each other's loops and draw them along the rod, listening for the saying quiet the scale will listen for tomorrow. Agreement arrives as a nod and a small change, one more white in the friends, one less in the new blue-green, so both patterns step closer to the middle, where usefulness lives. Mending returns in miniature. One loop has learned to twist because the knot was eager. A bowl of warm water sits near the lamp, the loop lies in it for the length of a verse hummed under breath. Lifted out and patted on a cloth, the thread remembers to loosen. The knot accepts a shake, then a press between thumbnails. Beads turn and find a calmer alignment. The loop dries on the dowel while the cat, now officially uninterested, watches from the windowsill as if accounting the street. On the far corner of the table, the to-be-tried envelope proves to hold beads cut a hair wider than usual. Their holes welcome thread without argument. Their edges look honest. Their color hovers between straw and sand. The two women weigh them with their eyes, and then with the pad of a finger against a single bead. A test pattern begins: straw sand, white, straw sand, then a single blue-green to wake the line. It works only if the white is small, and the blue-green is content to appear rarely. A note is penciled on a strip: straw plus small white, blue after 3. The strip slides under the bundle's tie. Nothing more is needed. A brief aside keeps company with the lamp. Unlike the furnaces where beads are born, these rooms decide their destinies quietly. Here, color combinations are invented by people who will never see the markets they travel to. Yet choices at this table: 3-1, 3 a white, or 5-1-5. None become the bracelets and embroidery of other places. The city's map expands by slow hands. The ledger folded paper that holds the day's sums opens for an evening line. Mark's note hangs finished, loops corrected, and the new pattern for straw. A dot sits at the end the way it sits on labels, the smallest signature. The friend adds a tiny cross next to the brown and white change, a memory aid to keep her wrist from repeating the morning's habit. The lamp's light makes graphite shine for a moment and then go dull. Refreshment arrives without ceremony: slices of pear set on a saucer and 2 little glasses of water. Pear edges glow in the lamplight and taste like the calmer end of summer. The quiet between bites feels like another kind of counting, the sort that measures enoughness rather than quantity. The cat decides that pears are beneath him and rearranges into the pose of animals in paintings, which pleases everyone for reasons that need no explanation. Bundles gather for tomorrow. Hanks tied in the afternoon are wrapped in paper that seems to be made of the same stillness as the room. Each packet is marked with the usual signs and a short, extra pencil: evening, used only at home to remember that these were checked and mended after dark. The packets stack in a small willow basket lined with cotton breeze. Paper guards, beads rest. A length of twine clips over the handle so the basket will remember which way is up. Thread ends are tamed before sleep. The needle empties, and rides into the cork of a small bottle so its point will meet nothing rude. The wax square turns to present a fresh face for morning. The tray of beads slides under a cloth that once was a sleeve. Sleeves preserve. The cloth holds a faint memory of lavender from a cupboard, and the room accepts the kindness without comment. The friend gathers her basket, and the door closes with the two-part rhythm that means later. Outside, a boatman sings a line and lets it finish by itself. The lamp is lowered a finger. The last loop of the evening is measured against the closer notch and tied. Knots lie flat, thread relaxes, beads settle along their line as if they have agreed to travel. Before the lamp goes out, the stringer lifts the dull where repaired loops have dried. They slide off and into their family with a sound like dry rain on paper. The ledger closes. The chair moves back to the wall. The window darkens to the color of the canal after the last oar. Sleep can come now or later. The table is ready either way. Delivery morning feels different even before the window finds its light. The room stands a little straighter. The tray hides under its cloth like a cat that approves. On the table, paper bundles tied with flat knots that open in one tug wait in a willow basket lined with cotton. Labels peep from the ties, factory letter, size, number, color, sign, and the small dot that says mine. The ledger opens for a single check mark beside each pattern tried this week: blue-green with white, straw and sand with a rare blue-brown with a kinder share of white. The pencil sets itself down with the good weight of things finished. The walk to the weighing room is an old path that never bores, down the narrow stairs that hold yesterday's river smell, over the small bridge where water shows its back to the sky, into the passage that leans away from the canal just enough to keep a hem clean. The basket rides close to the hip, paper rustles like leaves. The first door is propped with a wedge cut from boat plank. The second opens with a push to a room that remembers voices in neat lines. The scale answers like a polite host, plates leveled, beam at ease, weights nested by size in a small box that creaks softly when its lid lifts. Bundles open. Hanks left to pegs in 2s and 3s so the clerk's eye can count the ties without numbers. A rod slides through a loop and back again to test the thread's good manners. The beam dips, rises, settles. Pencil lines collect down the ledger's column, short names for long patience. Now and then the clerk pauses and runs a thumb along a Hank's fall as if smoothing hair. Then the pencil continues, and the Creighton waiting draws a breath. Crates hear smell of paste and dew straw. Each waits with paper cones nested like small trumpets to cradle Hanks on their way out. The word is always out, never away, as if distance were only a neighborly direction. Cones receive bundles, green married to yellow, a quiet white folded between, brown with white, slim spacers, blues in their 2 moods deep, and milk. A brush applies paste, paper closes without complaint, string crosses lid and bottom, and ties where a sensible pull will undo it later. A stamp the size of a thumbnail presses a small ship into damp paper. The ship does not shout, it merely assures. Payment comes as slips again, their edges paint so they cannot be slyly overed. The clerk counts them by weight and gives them in a fan. They slide into the ledger's pocket with a soft sound. New supplies cross the table in exchange, packets of the blue-green requested by letter, a shy lavender with a note that asks for gentle companions, coils of thread, 2 wax squares. The clerk nods at last night's evening mark on a label. He knows the habit and adds a pencil dot of his own where his column keeps quiet acknowledgments. Back across the bridge the day has widened. Laundry hangs like flags with no nation but cleanliness. A baker taps flour from a peel. A shoemaker's awl clicks with a sound that knows how to measure leather without seeing. The basket comes home lighter. The room receives it as if it had never left. Cloth lifts from the tray. The needle rises from its cork and greets the thread's eye without fuss. The week Though is almost finished with its tying, only order remains the kind that makes a Sunday feel like a clean page. Sunday tidy begins with small courtesies. The bead tray empties of crumbs those tiny chips, and perfect orphans that never found a loop into a glass jar that catches light and turns it into mild interest. The cloth lining the tray shakes out the week into the morning air, then rests across the back of a chair to forget its folds. The wax block turns so a fresh face will meet Monday. The needle's point sees a stone just a breath across the edge and returns honed and kind. The measure sticks wiped down with a rag that knows beeswax. Their notches look newly carved without being new. Thread ends are coaxed into usefulness. Short pieces not into markers that hang from peg and basket. One for use first, one for new, one for practice. Stray knots learn to lie flatter under thumbnails. A spool with a fussy catch unwinds to the fussy part, then rewinds with a paper collar to remind it to behave. The ledger receives its week's close, a longer line that balances bundles out and supplies in, with a little asterisk for the pattern that pleased, and a small cross for the one to watch. The book is folded and tied with a thread that once held a hank. Neighbors drift through in ones and twos. A seamstress brings a child's shirt with a shy tear along the hand. From the jar of orphan beads, 5 are chosen that agree with the cloth without pretending to be its color. They thread along a short length, curve around the mended place, and tie off on the inside with a knot pressed flat. The seam disappears into the idea of decoration. The child will call it a river and look for it with pride whenever the shirt dries in the window. A side note belongs here like a small pin. Beads often mended as much as they adorned hiding stitches, coaxing hens to lie, making repairs look like plans. A neighbor on her way to a wedding bows in the doorway with a ribbon in her hand and a worry on her face. The ribbon is fine but plain. The jar of orphans offers a whisper of white and to blue-greens that remember the lagoon. A length is stitched along one edge every 6 beads set a little closer so the line will curve in the bow. The ribbon sits up straighter and somehow more modest. It returns to the neighbor wrapped in the paper that once held straw and sand, and the paper seems pleased to help again. Later in the afternoon, the table becomes less of a table and more of a thought. Tools go to their corners. The basket for tomorrow's walk remains empty on purpose so Monday will have a shape waiting to be filled. The window opens a little wider, the canal sound turns from traffic to a sort of breathing. The cat patrols the perimeter and finds nothing out of place worth remarking on. A pear core from last night's lamplight sits in a bowl. It goes to the window ledge where one makes a case for hunger and then forgets it. Evening closes the room with 2 gestures. First, a tiny gift is made, a loop of mixed orphans, knotted at thumb and forefinger distance, tied to a scrap of card with a single penciled word for luck. It will go to the child who washed rain and rescued escapees with the little brush. Second, a single no loop begins, not to finish but to set Monday's direction. Lavender with patient companions white modestly, straw rarely a blue-green almost not at all. 7 beads enter the needle's path and stop. Enough to keep the pattern in the hand. Not enough to keep the mind awake when it wishes to rest. Outside, the water leans toward evening colors. Inside, the ledger sleeps. The wax cools. The needle rests its point. The room looks as if it has been tidied by someone who knows where everything lives. Because it has. And now, with colors packed and the canal going quiet, let's leave wet stone for dry hills. We'll follow a narrow line of shafts across a pale plain and meet the keepers who guide hidden water beneath. The earth-patient hands tending a Qanat's cool breath, one measured step at a time. Dawn draws a thin edge along the hills. The plain waits in colors that have not chosen names yet, pale sand, a gray that will be gold soon, a faint blue gathered near the horizon. A line of shallow mounds walks out from the mountain foot toward gardens that still look asleep. Between the mounds are round mouths in the earth, each lined with brick or stone, the surface shafts of a Qanat, where underground water takes its patient journey. The keepers arrive without noise. A small bundle of tools rides on a frame across a donkey's back. A skin of water touches the animal's ribs with a soft thump at each step. Two men walk, shirts light, trousers tied at the ankle, headcloths looped simply. Their sandals remember this path. One carries a short-handled pick and a flat-bladed shovel. The other has a coil of rope, a leather bucket rolled small, two lamps with clean wicks, and a plumb line wound around a wooden peg. In a cloth pouch, chalk a piece of charcoal, a little copper ruler, and a bread folded around dates. They stop at the first shaft, the mother, where the tunnel begins near the mountain's root. Air rising from it is cool and smells faintly of damp stone. The keeper lowers his palm above the opening and feels the small breeze that tells him the tunnel is clear. He dusts the rim with his fingers, lifting Brit into the air so it will not fall later. The rope is paid out slowly, the leather bucket unrolled and tied into its simple shape. A lamp is lit and lowered a little way to see whether the flame leans. It does, obediently, toward the tunnel's mouth. Air is moving well. The lamp comes up. No words are needed. A side note fits here like shade. Many regions tended such underground channels, different in detail and name, alike in purpose, drawing water quietly from high ground to low fields. Under heat that would gladly steal it at fast on the surface. A Qanat keeps water in the cool and dark while gravity carries it along. The keeper's work is to mind that gravity with care. They walk to the second shaft. Each mouth has its own mood, some edges square and carefully faced, some older and rounded, some rings of brick tight, some a little loose where the soil shifts in summer. The keeper touches each ring in turn, not to test strength by force, only to listen through his hand. Loose faces earn a mark with charcoal, a small dot, and a second mark if they will be tended today. He writes nothing on paper. The dots are enough, the dots and his memory. At the third shaft, the rope does its first work. The coil pays out as the younger man fastens it about his waist with a wrap that will sit below his ribs and not climb if he leans. The older keeper checks the knot with 2 fingers, nods, and lowers him into the round. The leather bucket follows, not down the same rope but along its own, so weight will not argue with weight. The lamp drops last in a small sling, its flame made small enough not to shout at the air. Inside, the tunnel holds a clean cool that the morning has not yet learned. The young man stands on the paved sill and waits for the stir of dust to settle where his feet found it. Stones the size of an egg sit near the wall. He moves them to the bucket, 2 at a time, keeping his shoulder low and his head still. The tunnel is high enough to stand in at this point. Later, it will boast only the height of a stoop-back. The lamp sits at arm's length, its flame leans toward the next shaft until he breathes, and then it leans again. He smiles to himself. Air likes its duty. Above, the keeper listens for the bucket's knock and lifts it in steady pulls, hand over hand, never jerking. The donkey shifts a foot and is quiet. When the bucket rises, stones are tipped to a small heap that will make a margin around the shaft, keeping blowing sand from learning to fall in. The bucket goes down again. Work repeats without the need for thought. When the floor is clear, the plumb line comes out. The line is a cord with a small weight at its end and a cross piece of wood that can be slid along it. The younger man finds the water's edge and sets the cross piece to the tunnel's roof. The plumb settles, the weight hangs still. The keeper above makes a notch on the peg with his knife to remember how far the water lies beneath the roof here. The same is done at the next shaft and the next. Later, the pair will compare the notches to confirm what they already know by ear. The tunnel keeps its slope gentle and even. Slope is a polite number in this work. Too steep, and the floor will learn to run. Too flat, and the water will hesitate. The keeper knows the measure by feel and by a small copper ruler that has only 2 marks on it, one at a finger's width, one at a thumb's. It is enough. He will check the grade again today with a long eye along the shafts, kneeling and setting his chin at rim height to see how their edges sit against the hills. The line of mouths should suggest a bow, not a cord. They take bread where a low mound casts a hand's width of shade. The older man opens the flat bread like a book and lays 3 dates inside. The younger men sip water sparingly, then touch the skin's neck to cool their foreheads. The donkey accepts a handful of straw and works it with a steady jaw. There is not much to say. A bird draws short cursive across the sky. A small lizard studies the shadow and leaves. Back to the line. At the 6th shaft, a stone ring has settled a finger. The keeper kneels and presses his palm at the joint. Dust sifts from the seam. He marks it with charcoal and asks the younger man to fetch the small hammer. The ring will be taught again to sit in its place skillfully, a little at a time, with packed gravel and wet clay. Not now. In an hour. First, he wishes to walk the line end to end and learn the day's order. Past the midpoint, the air grows cooler. Underground, the tunnel's floor carries a shallow stream that murmurs in a voice like late winter. The keeper listens for hollows that have grown, for any roof sound that suggests an older brace wishes to be replaced. He hears nothing unfriendly. The younger man drops a twig and watches it move. The twig drifts at a sure pace that tells him the slope is still telling truth. A side note belongs softly here. Water shares itself by turns in places like this. At the garden end, keepers and farmers track time by shadows and by a carved peg with notches. Each family's or brings a gate opened, a small board lifted, or a stone moved to let the stream wander into a trench and find their trees. No flag is waved when time changes, only a neighbor's nod, a bucket set aside, a gate returned to its groove. They come at last to the outlet, where the underground path meets air. Here, reeds lean and a small patch of ground stays green well past the month when other fields begin to ask. A low wall keeps the water to its channel. The keeper squats and lays his hand on the wall's outer face. Moisture sits inside like a thought. He pries a little silt from the guide stones with a narrow stick and lets it slip into the channel center. Then he lifts the small board that governs flow to the first garden and rests it against the bank. For the next while, the water will travel this way. After, it will turn toward another group of trees. The board knows all the times by the marks cut along its top edge. The morning has length now. The sun has chosen its warmth. The line of shafts looks less like holes and more like punctuation along a sentence written under the plane. The keepers turn back toward the 6th mouth and the loose ring. A small repair will be done in stages, gravel pressed, clay smooth, ring seated with a tap that is more a conversation than a blow. After that, the rope will be coiled, the bucket rolled, the lamps cleaned, the marks remembered. Everything here is measured in calm steps, pulls, handfuls, breaths. If the wind thinks of rising later, it will find the mouths guarded by their little mounds. If dust wishes to fall, it will be invited to settle somewhere else. Water will continue, as it prefers, out of sight, doing the same work in the same way, hour after hour, with only a shadow at a garden gate to say whose turn it is to listen to its sound. The sun climbs but keeps its edge soft. The keepers pause at the 6th shaft, where the ring asked for attention, and take the landscape into their eyes as if reading a line of script. The older man kneels, sets his chin level with the rim, and sights along the series of mouths. The shafts arrange themselves into a graceful bow across the plain, no sharp jumps, no sink, no proud rise. This is the lawn I checked, no measuring rod, only patient sight. and the memory of last month's curve. He blinks once, then twice, letting the heat shimmer settle. The line reads right. Still, the ring needs teaching. From a sack, he draws a small scoop and a skin of water. The younger man fetches a basket of gravel sieved fine enough to behave like firm sand. First, the seam is brushed with the back of a glove to lift loose dust. Next, the scoop places gravel into the gap a handful at a time, followed by a breath of water pressed in with a flat stick. The stick does not jab, it persuades. Tap dash pause dash tap dash pause. Clay follows, a thumb smear of it kneaded earlier in a bowl, press, smooth, then a palm across the face to remind both materials to be neighbors. A light ring of wet shows a promise to shrink together as they dry. Again, the older keeper says, not as instruction, more as rhythm. Gravel, water press, clay smooth press. After the third circuit, the ring sits true, no longer curious about wandering. A small roll of cloth, saved for such moments, is bound around the top to shade the seam while it learns to be itself. The charcoal mark on the brick receives a second line slanted the other way to say the work is joined and can be checked toward evening. They lower the lamp and coil of rope once more. The younger man goes down with the leather bucket and a short rake whose teeth are cut from seasoned tamarisk. The tunnel floor, where water runs, carries a thin carpet of silt the way a river keeps memory of upstream. Not too much, just enough to soften the footsteps of maintenance and hold a small shine when the lamp looks at it. Today, though, a corner after the bend has gathered more than its share, thickened by a windstorm last week that found one mouth less cautious than the others. The rake is short by design, long tools quarrel with low ceilings. Knees find a stance that pleases the back. Teeth comb the bottom in narrow lanes, drawing silt toward the center run so the flow will carry it onward. No gouging, no proud ridges, only evenness. Where the rake hesitates against a small stone, the younger man lifts it by hand and sends it to the leather bucket, to fingers only, so the floor will not learn a hole. He keeps the lamp a pace away, watching its flame lean. When the flame sits to straight, he waits for the draft from the next shaft to reach him again before continuing. Air and water like the same patience. Above, the older keeper listens for the bucket's talk against the wall. It rises filled with silt, which he tips at a respectful distance from the rim, building a low bank shape to direct rare rain away rather than toward. On days like this, the earth learns manners by small repetitions. Between hauls, he cleans the bucket's lip with the edge of a reed so mud will not thicken the rope. He checks the knot on the belayed peg once, twice, never assuming an earlier care will hold without greeting. Down below, the rake finds the bend. Bends are where silt likes to stay and where bracing beams sometimes ask if they still fit. The younger man lifts the lamp, sets it on a shelf in the wall, a niche carved long ago for this reason, and runs his palm along the tunnel's shoulder. The clay plaster feels sound, cool, not flaking. One hairline line shows where two seasons met. He smooths it with a wet thumb, and it forgets to be a line. The pump of his breath and the small shuffle of the rake become the only sounds. The tunnel accepts both. At the next shaft the ceiling dips. He lowers himself and walks bent, the lamp in his left hand and the rake in his right. The flame leans toward the future. A side note rests here. Experienced keepers can read draft like others read weather. A flame that leans and returns means the tunnel sings. A flame that staggers or refuses to choose a direction asks a question worth hearing. Today's answer is simple. Go on. They work a measured hour, then trade places. The older man goes down with the rake while the younger tends the rope and bucket. The older body chooses a shorter stroke and more frequent rests, not as concession but as wisdom. He remembers where the floor fell away once a decade ago and where a careless pick made a ceiling think of falling. He honors those memories with lighter hands and a lamp set further from the work. Silt, he often says without saying, is a guest that leaves when you open the door with courtesy. When the rake returns to its peg and the bucket grows light, they test slope again by and by ear. The older man drops a thin reed and watches it slide along the center run a good pace, not eager. He crouches and presses the side of his face to the wall to feel, with cheek-skin that learned long ago, whether the water cools evenly along the length. It does. He smiles in the way men do when they approve and do not wish to disturb approval by naming it. They climb and circle back to the loosened ring. The cloth band comes off, the seam has dried to a new quiet. A knuckle taps the brick. The sound returns as a single note rather than two. He scrapes the charcoal marks to near nothing with a little shard. The ring looks as though it has always sat so. Midday asked for shade. A low awning patched from older sacks spreads between a pair of guide stones and makes a rectangle of cool. The donkey finds it first, stations himself, as if he had written the plan, and closes his eyes. Bread returns. Dates share their sweetness. A pinch of salt brightens both. The younger man fills the leather bucket with clear water and pours it over a cloth that lies across the neck. He places this against the inner wrist for a moment, then against the back of the knee. The body reads the message without comment and thanks it. They review the line in their heads, not out loud, yet together. Mother shaft breathes. Second, clear. Third, clean. Fourth, sound. Fifth, cool bent. Sixth, ring settled. Outlet guided. The older keeper glances toward the gardens where shade trees make small islands. By late afternoon they will walk there to mark turns at the sharing gate. One family's time ends when the shadow on a pegboard touches a notch. No bell rings. A hand lifts, another hand nods, the board returns to its slot, and the water changes allegiances without learning resentment. Before rising, they plan one more kindness for the tunnel, a drift board for the bend. From a plank strapped to the donkey's frame, they cut a piece no longer than a forearm, and no wider than a palm. Its edge is shaved to a gentle curve. Set in the floor's center at the bend, it will teach water to keep to the middle and carry what the rake loosened. A small stone pins it on one side. At the next visit, they will see if it please the flow. If not, they will turn it a thumb or shift it the width of a reed. Remedies here are mostly small and reversible. When the sun leans, they tidy tools. Lamps are snuffed by a pinch at the wick, never blown, so soot will not travel. Wicks curl politely. The leather bucket is rinsed and hung where air can reach it from both sides. Rope is coiled without kinks, then tied with a loop that will release in a blink tomorrow. The rake's teeth are smoothed in the hand to remind them they are not claws. As they set off along the line toward the gardens, the shafts pass by like friends at their doors. Each gets a glance, not a stare. The repaired ring holds. The mounds keep their shape in the afternoon breeze. The long eye is satisfied. Underfoot, a low drum in the earth keeps time. The waters walk, patient and sure, beneath heat that would otherwise drink too much. The path from the last shaft bends toward trees that make their own air. Date palms draw slow frowns against the sky. Pomegranate, apricot, and mulberry throw a softer shade that smells faintly green even before water ives. Here the Qanat comes up to meet the daylight. A narrow channel edged with stones rubbed smooth by many seasons of passing. Beside the first garden stands a low post set in packed earth. A slat rests against it, carved with notches along the top like a calm smile filled with teeth. The keepers call it the sharing board. A flat pebble sits in the second notch from the left, catching a square of sun. When that light touches the third notch, the turn will change. No bell, no horn. The board keeps time in a way that the trees understand because shadows move as steadily as thirst. The older keeper squats and lifts a small plank set across the channel just a palm's breadth so water can divide and travel down a side run toward the first basin. He places the plank upright in the fork so the flow will not forget its direction. The younger man walks ahead with the short hoe. At each tree he draws a low ring of damp earth together, mending where a heel or a root disturbed it last time. When water reaches the ring, it fills the basin from one side and then the other until the surface shines like a small, thinking coin. The ring holds, and the water rests in soil that answers with a scent remembered from other springs. Near the gate, a wide stone serves as a desk. Its face is worn to a shallow tray by years of hands laying small things there. Today it holds 3 piles of rounded pebbles and 1 piece of broken pot impressed with 2 lines, morning and afternoon. Each family keeps a little stack for the hours promised to them this week. When a turn begins, 1 pebble moves to the opposite side. Children like this part and often perform it with ceremonial care, placing the stone and then tapping it once as if to say stay. A gentle aside fits here in some towns. A water steward, the Mirab, speaks for the channel and settles questions in a voice everyone knows. In others, the line of stones and the notched board do the speaking, and neighbors read them as easily as a lane. The rules are modest and old. They do not change fast, because first does not. The first families are stretches along the slope of morning. Grandmother spreads a cloth under a mulberry and sits where she can see the shining in the basins without rising. A boy carries a shallow pan and scoops silt where the side run slows at a corner, emptying it into a neat heap that will later become part of a wall somewhere. The younger keeper shows him where to smooth the mud lip with the heel of his hand so the water will not nibble at it and go wandering. The boy nods without speaking. The lesson is a motion more than a thought. When the pebble's shadow touches the 3rd notch, the older keeper walks to the gate and lowers the small plank again. He lifts a 2nd board, sets it at the next fork, and tilts it by a thumb's width so the flow favors another line of trees. A woman from the 2nd garden raises a hand, then lowers it, the sign that says I see and thank you in 1 stroke. The first family's boy carries his pan to the stone and moves a pebble from the 2 compile to the done side. The broken pot receives a new mark in thus 2 short strokes for 2 turns this morning. Wind will wipe the marks after the day is finished. The pebbles will tell the week's story longer. Down the run, an apricot has made a small habit of claiming more than its share. The younger man presses a narrow channel from its basin toward a neighbor that stands thinner. He opens a thumb-wide breach on the high side and closes it with a lump of damp earth when the 2nd tree's basin looks satisfied. No scolding, only a reminder that the water is for the orchard, not for the trees that remember to be greedy. The keepers move with water but also with air. When the path dips into a cooler pocket, they lift their scarves over the mouth and nose against dust that learn to drift. When the channel rises along stones that faced sun all morning, their sandals quicken. Hands stay easy, tools touch and then leave. A long-handled scoop lies by the side for deeper basins. It is used only when roots ask softly for more. At midday the Mirab arrives with a ledger that is not made of paper. He carries a shallow bowl with small stones sorted by color, dark for the upper fields, pale for the lower, a single red that means repair. He sits on the big stone by the gate and listens to people without writing. When a complaint arrives, the curve by our wall slows more than it used to. He turns 1 stone, then another into a little pattern that says we will open the bend and return a handful. The older keeper touches the red stone with a finger to show that the task sits near the top of their day. The bowl becomes a map of intention, nothing binding, everything binding enough. A side channel hums along the garden wall where mint and cress grow in a strip no wider than a boot. Here the younger man kneels and pinches a leek with wet clay between finger and thumb until the trickle forgets its bad habit. He smooths the patch with a wetted reed and sets a pebble against it, a reminder for tomorrow to check whether clay kept its promise. Small patches make big faith. Children practice reading the board with shadows and guessing when the notch will meet the bright line. A girl holds her hand flat above the slat to catch the sun, and then moves it away to see time happen. Her grandmother laughs once, and hands her 3 dried figs, instructions for the afternoon's patience. Under a palm the air tastes cooler. Tea appears from a cloth-wrapped pot set on coals in a pan. Cups travel from hand to hand without announcement, each returned with a sound that means glass and stone have met and are on good terms. As afternoon lengthens, an allotment for the far orchard begins. The gate board turns by the width of a reed, and water takes a longer path. The keepers walk ahead to visit the last channels before they receive their share. Here the rungs are older. One stone has settled, a joint shows a hairline. The older man kneads a small lump of clay and presses it into the place where trickles prefer to learn escape. He rubs the seam smooth with the heel of his hand, then with the side of his wrist, then with his palm, each touch wider and lighter than the one before. Clay knows how to remember shapes when asked kindly. The last turn her eyes as the day leaves. Light grows low and flattering, leaves shine deeper, basins mirror sky. The board's shadow approaches the final notch, and the mirab tips his bowl, returns the stones to their first order, and wipes the dust marks from the big stone with the side of his hand. The older keeper lifts the gate plank one more time and sets it straight across the main run. Night will carry a thin trickle along the center to keep the channel honest and cool. The turns will begin again tomorrow with a pebble moved to the first notch. Tools return to their places as if each had a habit of arriving there on its own hole, leaning under the tamarisk. Scoop across the low fork, driftboard checked and praised by a gesture. The donkey shakes his ears at a fly and looks pleased to be part of the conclusion. The garden puffs grow their evening smell, damp earth folding itself, leaves giving back what the sun took. On the walk home, the line of shafts seems to hum underfoot, but it is only the foot remembering the hollow beneath and the water repeating what it always says, I am going, you are guiding. We will meet the trees on time. Evening lays its hand across the plain and the day loosens. Heat rises like a quiet exhale from stone. The line of shafts takes the dusk into their rims, each mouth a dim coin that seems to darken from the center outward. The keepers wait until the first clear star shows where the hills lower, then set out with the lamp, the rope, and a small bundle of reeds trimmed to equal lengths. Night inspection walks more by listening than by looking. The donkey goes light, carrying only the rolled leather bucket and a folded cloth. Hoof on soil sounds different now, rounder, less eager. A breeze travels downhill in a thread. Where it meets the rising breath from the mother shaft, the two fold into one another and become an even draft along the tunnel. The older keeper holds the lamp at shoulder height and watches the flame lean. It tilts steadily toward the outline. He nods, a motion more felt than seen. Stars arrange themselves into their old patient shapes. The older man touches two with a fingertip held at arm's length, tracing the angle he has used all his life to no slope when clouds hide hills, one bright mark over the shoulder of another. The measure is simple and forgiving. The stars stand where they stood last season. The earth lies as it lay. If the line of miles reads like a bow by day and the draft agrees by night, the water will do what it has promised to do. A gentle aside belongs here. Before numbers came easily to paper in these places, angles lived in arms and elbows, in star-to-hill memories that could be carried without ledger or chalk. At the second shaft they rest the lamp on the rim for a counting breath, then lower it by a looped thong until its light touches the tunnel's air. The flame narrows and lengthens in the draft, never threatening to falter. A reed dropped carefully falls free and clicks on stone with the sound. The older man expects no sticky walls, no new shelf, just height enough for the next generation's shoulders. A bat breaks the dark once, draws a silver curve, and is gone. The third mouth lives near a low rise where day's heat lingers longer. Now, in the cool, the ring of brick holds a faint dew along its inner edge, the smallest shine that tells of air willing to trade warmth with night. The younger man rubs a pebble across the top course, the dew lifts and then returns as a thin breath. He leaves one of the trimmed reeds across the rim, its shadow points toward the outlet. He sets a second reed alongside, the two form a shallow arrow. Tomorrow in light, he will read their angle again from memory to confirm that the night's draft and the day's long eye keep steady company. They walk on. A jackal's neat tracks cross the path between two mouths, toes pointed precise and light. The younger man smiles at the print and does not follow it with his look. The plain prefers to pretend no one else travels here at night. Each chef receives the same small visit. A glance at the brick, a touch to the packed mound to confirm it has not learned a slump, a pause to listen to the sound underfoot. With practice, the keepers can hear where water says stone here and where it says silk there, a difference more like two vowels than two words. At the bend shaft they lower the lamp deeper and go down for a moment. Night cool presses the skin like cloth dipped in water and wrung almost dry. The drift board they set earlier in the day stands where they placed it. The water falls past, not louder, not slower, just more certain in its center. A moth flutters near the lamp, and then decides the dark is a better idea. The older man touches the floor with the back of his fingers and lets that small patch of skin read temperature. It matches the cool he expects at this hour, proof not so much of numbers as of a relationship between earth and air that has not changed. Back on the plain, the moon lifts itself over the eastern shoulder of the hills, a silver coin rising from a purse. The chefs take this new light and wear it as halos rather than circles. Shadows have edges now. The keepers reach the sixth mouth where the ring was taught earlier. The seam shows as a darker band and not as a crack. A knuckle on brick returns one note. He leans the lamp so light runs along the face, revealing nothing wanting. The cloth that shaded the seam during its drying is lifted and packed into the bag again. Clay, gravel, ring, air the four agree, and the agreement feels like a deepened calm. They step toward the outlet. The channel beyond the last chef carries a quiet stripe of sky. Frogs claim a corner of the sound, and then yield it. The sharing board leans against its post as it does at night, not counting, only resting. The mihrab's bowl, turned upside down on the stone, keeps dew from the pebbles. A faint draft lifts a curl of dust from the gate plank, moves at a finger's breadth, and lets it settle again. The older keeper lowers the lamp close to the water. Reflections return in thin, straight answers. If the line were to wobble into V's, or if little waves were to chatter where none should be, he would know. Tonight the surface is the steady mirror of a breath that remembers its quarter. They sit. Night shares a little cold through the packed sore, so the folded cloth earns its place on the stone before they settle. Bread from morning tastes better just for having waited. The younger man chews and watches a long, slow satellite walk a diagonal between two familiar stars. The older man drinks from the skin and passes it, then rubs a thumb along the leather so it will not crack when dry. The donkey stands a little aside and makes the sort of sound that means he approves of the pause. Before they return, there is a small courtesy to pay. The older keeper pinches out the lamp's flame and touches the warm iron to the rim of the thong loop. It says enough. He dips two fingers into the channel and drips a little water on the gate plank's top edge, darkening the wood. This is not a rite with a name. It is a habit born from liking things to be comfortable, wood that swelled by noon will ease by morning. A reed is set where the sharing board meets its post, marking with no words the plan to start tomorrow's turn at the first notch when the shade cuts exactly to the carved tooth. On the way back, the plane feels larger in the near silence, and the line of shafts feels closer. Night has a way of putting distance and nearness into a friendly argument. At the mother shaft they pause and lean, letting the cool brush their faces. The draft carries the smell of plaster and wet stone and something like sleep. The older man lowers the lamp one last time, not to see, but to listen for that soft hiss that says air is sure of its path. It comes, and he lets the lamp hang there for a count of 10, then draws it up and lets darkness settle exactly as it was. At the house, tools go to their night places. The rope, loosely hung, will forget any daytime kink by dawn. The bucket seams are wiped and left open to dryness. The lamp's wick is trimmed to a clean edge. The reeds are counted to left, to used, to more cut tomorrow. The men sit on a step and say nothing for a while. The sky cools another color. Somewhere a poplid lifts and returns, a child coughs in sleep and then doesn't. The Qanat will hum all night under soil, the same note lifting beneath the line of mounds like a continuous thread. It does not need watching every hour, it likes only to be greeted and understood. Night has greeted it, morning will understand again. Dawn returns with the color of warm linen. The first breeze walks down from the stony ribs of the hills and lies along the line of mouths like a scarf. The keepers come with the calm of people meeting a friend who kept the watch well. Rope rides the shoulder, the leather bucket taps a friendly rhythm against the thigh, the lamp, trimmed last night, waits in a cloth like an egg kept safe. They begin at the mother shaft, not because it demands ceremony, but because beginnings deserve to be greeted. The older keeper lowers the lamp to the height of a man and listens. The flame leans, then rests, then leans again, draft breathing as it should. He raises the lamp, pinches the wick, and rubs a thumb along the warm iron to smooth a bit of soot, a small courtesy to tomorrow. The reed markers set at night are gathered and replaced. Each rim receives a fresh length cut to the same measure, laid with its shadow toward the outlot. The younger man sets one reed a finger's width inside the ring of brick to remind the day to notice this mouth first next week. The habit keeps rounds from wearing a single path to deep. He straightens a low mound with the flat of the shovel, drawing the slope down and away so rare rain will learn to pass by without curiosity. The shovel's edge makes a sound like fine paper. Sand accepts the lesson. At the bend shaft, the drift board is checked with a hand that reads more than it presses. Water taking the middle looks like a sentence spelled with care. A few grains of silt, loosened yesterday, have moved on. The younger man smiles at the tiny clean gloss along the board's curved lip. The board is doing the work it was asked it to do modestly. He nudges the pinning stone the width of a reed, not because it must be done, but because small adjustments preserve large quiet. They carry a handful of reeds to the outlet and leave them in a neat bundle near the sharing board for the next keeper whose turn will begin the following cycle. A faint draft lifts the top reed as if agreeing. By full morning the gardens stir in their own language, broom on packed earth, the jug set on a low wall, date fronds talking in a private hush. The Mirab arrives with his shallow bowl of stones and a short staff polished by many ponds. He sits on the broad gate stone and tilts the bowl so the small pebbles slide into a shallow crescent, dark for upper fields, pale for lower, the single red for remember. The older keeper lowers himself onto the wall. There is no ledger of paper, yet the day grows numbers by gestures. They recount the week without counting aloud. A ring settled at the sixth move, the bend combed, the leak pinched and smooth, the night draft proved, shares kept to notches and shadow. For each recollection the Mirab turns a stone with a fingernail. The sound is the quietest calendar. When he speaks it is to ask, was the fourth mouth calm, and to say after a nod, good. The red stone taps the bowl's rim and returns to the middle. Repairs done, no debt carried. A boy from the first garden comes with 3 figs in a cloth, and a confusion he cannot phrase yet. The younger keeper understands anyway. He takes the plumb line, places the crosspiece at the tunnel's imagined roof on the boy's outstretched arm, and lets the weight find stillness. He points to the string, then to the slope of ditch stones, and traces the tiny difference between enough and eager with his finger in dust. 1 finger's width over a dozen paces, no more. The boy nods with the fierce seriousness of someone entrusted with a number he can feel. The hour for turning shares approaches. Shadows creep along the notches of the board in their well-taught path. The Mirab lifts the small gate plank with the staff and sets it against a post. Water, unoffended, turns toward the next run and keeps its temper. A woman salutes with her palm, and later brings a cup of tea that tastes of mint, and the brief cool from a clay jug's neck. The men drink in 3 slow swallows, and make the small sound that says enough and thank you in one breath. Before noon the last round of checks begins, the kind that folds a week and leaves it smooth. Each shaft receives a touch to its rim as to the shoulder of someone passing. I see you. At the repaired ring, a thumb presses the seam. It returns firmness without pride. At the low runs, the younger man needs a thumb of clay where the wall's edge looked thoughtful. He draws the wet heel of his hand along the join so it remembers to be one thing. They coil the rope with its loops lying flat, no kinks to teach it bad habits overnight. The leather bucket is rinsed, turned, and hung where air can find its inner curve. The lamp's wick is trimmed even, the lamp itself sits on its cloth to spare the stone a ring of oil. The shovel's edge meets a smooth stone once, twice. Its flat is wiped with a damp palm so dust will not grow fond of it. At the sharing gate, the broad stone desk is cleaned by the simplest method, a wet palm across dust, a dry sleeve after. The bowl of pebbles slides back into its pouch. The staff leans at its place on the post. The notched board is left with its first tooth at the ready. A single pebble sits in that notch as a beginning the I cannot ignore. A side note belongs softly here, even if only the wind hears it. Much of this labor is blessing disguised as routine. Names are not spoken in long strings. No mouths ask the earth for permission with speeches. Instead, scenes are pressed, shadows are read, water is invited to be itself and to share. The gratitude that lives in such places speaks in tools put away gently and in pots left tidy. The last act is a courtesy to the trees. The older keeper palms a little channel soil and rubs it between fingers until its grit becomes mud. He holds it a moment, then lets it fall back where it came from. The younger man lays the flat of his hand on the gate plank, feeling the cool the morning gave it, and the warmth the noon will try to claim. The donkey, who has his own theology of shade and regular meals, stops once and lowers his head to listen to what he calls silence, and what is, in truth, water speaking under earth. When they turn toward home, the line of mouths sits with the self-possession of work that will continue without applause. The keepers walk softer now, the way people move after a long table has been cleared and a candle pinched. Tools balance easily. The rope does not swing, it rests. The day opens into its wider heat, but the Qanat keeps the cool it was given, inch by inch, under the skin of the plain. At the house, the week is put away like folded cloth. The rope hangs loose to forget its task and be ready for it again. The bucket seams are rubbed with a bit of fat so leather will not become stubborn. The lamp sits with its mouth covered against dust. The bundle of reeds is tied with a flat knot and set high, where a mouse cannot become interested. And because people like to end with a word that is not quite a word, the older keeper touches his fingertips to the doorway's wood and lets them fall to his side. The younger man answers with the smallest nod. No need to call it anything. The water is going. The earth is listening. The weak talk will teach the next. Now these quiet lives and careful hands will keep you company as you rest. Thank you for listening, and may your sleep be deep and easy